The moment Claire Monroe's breath touched his ear at that wedding, Ryan Walker's carefully constructed life began to crack. A single father who'd spent 2 years keeping his world separate, office badges and bedtime stories, performance reviews and parent-teacher conferences, suddenly faced the one collision he couldn't afford. His CEO, the woman whose approval determined his son's stability, had just whispered words that acknowledged what they'd both pretended didn't exist. In a room full of celebrating strangers, between a ceremony about promises and a reception about joy, Ryan had to choose: protect what he'd built alone or risk everything for what might be built together. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, drop a like and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me tell you about the night everything changed. Ryan Walker had learned to measure time in small increments. 7 minutes to get Ethan's shoes on the right feet. 4 minutes to pack a lunch that would actually get eaten. 12 minutes of buffer time for the inevitable "I forgot my homework" or "Can we bring Mr. Bear?" 38 minutes total from wake up to school drop-off, if everything went according to plan. It rarely did. But Ryan had become an expert in adaptation, in the quiet choreography of single parenthood, in managing expectations, his own, his son's, and the world's. At 34, he'd built a life that functioned on precision and compartmentalization. There was Ryan the father, who knew every word to the bedtime stories and could identify which specific shade of blue crayon was ocean versus sky. And there was Ryan, the marketing analyst, who arrived early, stayed late when needed, and kept his head down at Meridian Technologies with the focused determination of someone who understood that stability wasn't guaranteed, it was earned daily, in small increments. The two Ryans never touched. They existed in separate spheres, running on parallel tracks that never intersected. They couldn't. The moment they did, the careful balance would shift, and Ryan had learned the hard way that when you're raising a child alone, balance isn't luxury, it's survival. Which made the wedding invitation sitting on his kitchen counter for 3 weeks a particular kind of problem. "Dad, why do you keep staring at that card?" Ethan, 6 years old and unnervingly perceptive, looked up from his cereal with those dark eyes that saw too much. Ryan's eyes. His ex-wife had different eyes, lighter, harder. Ethan had been spared those. "Just thinking, buddy." Ryan poured coffee he didn't have time to drink, another ritual of a morning that would compress or expand depending on variables beyond his control. "Remember I told you about my friend Marcus from college? The one who sends me birthday cards with dinosaurs, even though I'm too old for dinosaurs now?" "You're never too old for dinosaurs." Ryan smiled despite himself. "He's getting married next month, Saturday the 14th. Ethan processed this with the seriousness he applied to most adult information. "Are you going?" That was the question, wasn't it? Ryan had been asking himself for weeks, since the elegant cardstock arrived with Marcus Chen and Jennifer Hartley embossed in silver, since he'd seen the venue, the Grandview Estate downtown, the kind of place that required RSVPing and actual formal wear. "I'm not sure yet. It's in the evening, so you'd stay with Mrs. Patterson." Their neighbor, the retired teacher who'd become Ryan's emergency backup for everything from flu days to late meetings. "But it's a Saturday. We usually do movie night. We can do movie night on Sunday." Ethan said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. When had his 6-year-old become the one offering flexibility? "You should go, Dad. Marcus is your friend. Friends go to weddings." Simple logic, delivered with the clarity only children possessed. Ryan reached over and ruffled his son's hair, still shower damp, smelling of the strawberry shampoo Ethan insisted on despite Ryan's suggestions of something more neutral. "When did you get so smart?" "I was always smart." Ethan grinned, gap-toothed and confident. "You just noticed." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, the kind that had developed over 2 years of it being just the two of them. Ryan cleaned while Ethan packed his backpack, another inverted routine that worked because they'd learned to work together. By the time they loaded into Ryan's 10-year-old sedan, paid off, reliable, unsexy, the morning choreography had completed another successful run. The elementary school drop-off lane moved with the organized chaos of military maneuvers. Ryan waited his turn, watching other parents, mostly mothers, some fathers, a handful of nannies he recognized by now, navigate the same ritual. When Ethan's door opened, Ryan delivered the same lines he delivered every morning. "Have a good day. Listen to Ms. Rodriguez. I'll be here at 3:15. "I know, Dad." Ethan rolled his eyes, but he leaned back for the quick hug that Ryan would never take for granted. "Love you. Love you more. Love you most." Ethan delivered the final word of their routine exchange and bounded toward the entrance, backpack bouncing, already shouting something to a friend Ryan didn't recognize. New, probably. Ethan made friends easily, collected them like trading cards, seemed unburdened by the complications that weighed down adult relationships. Ryan watched until his son disappeared through the doors, then joined the procession of vehicles exiting the school zone. 22 minutes to get downtown to Meridian Technologies, traffic depending. The Meridian Technologies building rose 43 stories above the financial district, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. Ryan's office was on the 16th floor, high enough to have a view, low enough to remember he wasn't at the top. He'd been with the company for 3 years, starting just months after his divorce finalized, when he'd needed not just income, but purpose, structure, something to prove that he could still build a career while building a life for his son. Marketing analytics suited him. Numbers made sense. Data didn't require interpretation the way people did. You tracked engagement, measured conversion, optimized performance, clear inputs, measurable outputs. Ryan was good at it, good enough to earn steady raises, good enough to be trusted with significant accounts, good enough to be noticed, just not too noticed. "Morning, Ryan." Jessica from Brand Strategy passed his cubicle with her usual coffee-fueled energy. "Did you see the memo about the Monroe Initiative presentation? They're doing final selection next week." Ryan had seen it. The Monroe Initiative was the company's flagship leadership development program, named after the CEO who'd launched it when she took over 18 months ago. Competitive, prestigious, the kind of thing that accelerated careers. Ryan had been encouraged to apply. He hadn't. "Yeah, saw it." He logged into his workstation, already pulling up the campaign reports that needed review before the 10 o'clock meeting. "You applying?" "Already submitted." Jessica leaned against his cubicle wall, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Though between us, I think it's mostly for show. Monroe probably already knows who she wants. She notices everything." That was true. Claire Monroe had a reputation, not the harsh, demanding type of notice that created fear, but the precise, comprehensive awareness that created excellence. She knew her company, knew her people, moved through the building with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need volume. Ryan had been in exactly 3 meetings with her, watched her cut through hours of potential discussion with questions so direct they eliminated everything except truth. He respected the hell out of her, from a distance, where it was safe. "Well, good luck with it." Ryan turned back to his screen, the universal signal that he had work to do. Jessica took the hint, moving on with a wave. The morning proceeded in its familiar rhythm. Reports, emails, a conference call with a client on the West Coast who couldn't understand why their engagement metrics were declining. Ryan explained gently that authentic connection couldn't be manufactured through aggressive retargeting. They disagreed. He documented the disagreement. Professional, detached, exactly what the situation required. Lunch was a protein bar at his desk, eaten while reviewing competitive analysis. Ryan had learned to make time elastic, to fit 45 minutes of work into 30-minute blocks, to exist in the margins. Some of his colleagues took full hours, went out to restaurants, treated midday like a break. Ryan treated it like an opportunity to leave at 5:15 instead of 6, to be home before Ethan finished homework, to reclaim minutes that would otherwise disappear into the corporate void. He was closing his laptop, preparing to head to the 3 o'clock status meeting, when his phone buzzed. Marcus Chen's name appeared on the screen, connected to a text that immediately made Ryan smile. "Dude, final head count due Friday. Are you coming, or am I going to have to live with the fact that my college roommate missed my wedding because he's become a hermit?" Ryan could picture Marcus perfectly as he typed it, probably grinning, definitely using voice to text because typing full messages was inefficient, wearing something expensive but somehow making it look casual. They'd lived together for 3 years at State, had been close enough that Marcus was one of the first people Ryan called when his marriage imploded. Close enough that Marcus had shown up with pizza and beer and no judgment, had sat with Ryan in an empty apartment while Ethan slept in the only bedroom that had furniture, had listened to all of it without trying to fix anything. Real friendship, the kind that didn't require maintenance, just showed up when needed. Ryan typed back, "Not a hermit, a father. There's a difference." 3 dots appeared immediately. Same thing sometimes. But seriously, come. Jennifer's excited to meet you, and I promise the open bar will make up for having to wear a suit. The suit. Ryan had exactly one, purchased for interviews 3 years ago, probably still fit if he was lucky. He'd have to check. "Let me confirm childcare. I'll let you know by tomorrow." That's not a no. I'm counting it as a yes. Ryan smiled despite himself, pocketed his phone, and headed to the conference room where his afternoon would be spent discussing Q3 projections for a product launch he'd helped develop. The meeting ran long, they always did, but Ryan contributed when asked, stayed quiet when possible, and by 5:20 was heading to his car with the satisfied exhaustion of a day completed. Traffic was moderate. He picked up Ethan at aftercare, listened to a detailed explanation of why certain Pokémon were objectively superior to others, and made it home by 6:15 to start the dinner homework bath bedtime sequence that constituted their evenings. "Dad?" Ethan looked up from his math worksheet, pencil hovering. "Did you decide about the wedding?" "Almost." Ryan checked the chicken in the oven, calculated timing. "I need to make sure Mrs. Patterson is available." "She will be. She told me last week she doesn't have plans." "You already asked her?" Ethan shrugged, returning to his multiplication problems with the casualness of someone who'd taken initiative and saw no reason to make it complicated. "I thought you might need help deciding." Ryan studied his son. This small person who'd learned to anticipate needs, who'd developed competence beyond his years, not because Ryan pushed, but because circumstances required. It was one of those moments that happened occasionally when the weight of single parenthood felt less like burden and more like privilege. Yes, it was hard. Yes, Ryan carried it alone. But he was raising someone who noticed things, who helped without being asked, who understood that family meant supporting each other. "Thanks, buddy." Ryan's voice came out rougher than intended. "That was thoughtful." "I know," Ethan grinned. "So are you going?" Ryan thought about Marcus, about promises made years ago to stay connected even as life diverged. He thought about his closet, about whether he owned appropriate shoes. He thought about Ethan, about modeling what it meant to maintain relationships, to show up for people who mattered. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'm going." Brent. The next 2 weeks passed in the compressed time that defined Ryan's existence. Work intensified, a major client presentation, unexpected personnel changes, the kind of organizational turbulence that required extra hours and careful navigation. Home intensified too. Ethan's school project on habitats, a minor cold that wasn't serious enough to stay home but needed monitoring, the constant low-level logistics of keeping a 6-year-old healthy, educated, and emotionally stable. Ryan managed it all with the competence he'd developed through necessity, but by the Thursday before Marcus's wedding, he was running on fumes and determination. "You look tired." Jessica materialized at his cubicle with her characteristic directness. "Everything okay?" "Fine. Just a busy week." Ryan didn't look up from his screen, where he was formatting slides that needed to be perfect because the CEO would be in tomorrow's presentation. Claire Monroe didn't accept sloppy work, didn't forgive missed details. "How'd your Monroe Initiative interview go?" "Intense. She asked about my 5-year vision, then asked why I was lying." Jessica laughed, but there was respect in it. "She's intimidating as hell, but in the best way. Like she sees exactly who you are and decides if that's useful." Ryan had never wanted to be seen that clearly. Useful was fine. Invisible was better. Invisible meant stable, predictable, safe, from the kind of attention that created complications. "Well, I hope you get it." "Thanks." Jessica paused. "You know, you could have applied. You're probably more qualified than half the people who did." I'm good where I am. Ryan delivered the line he'd perfected, the one that ended this conversation before it became uncomfortable. Advancement means unpredictability. I've got a kid. Predictability wins. It was true enough that Jessica accepted it, moving on to discuss weekend plans that Ryan only half heard. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Patterson confirming Saturday, Marcus sending the venue address, a reminder from Ethan's school about the upcoming conference. Compartments. Everything in its place, nothing bleeding over. Friday's presentation went well. Ryan contributed his section on audience segmentation, fielded questions from the executive team with practiced calm, and carefully avoided direct eye contact with Claire Monroe, even though he could feel her attention during his portions. She asked one question, precise, cutting straight to a potential weakness in the data model, and Ryan answered honestly about the limitations, about what they knew and what they were still testing. Good. That was all she said, one word that somehow conveyed approval, and Ryan felt something relax in his chest. Useful. Not invisible, but not too visible either. Exactly where he needed to be. By Saturday afternoon, Ryan had successfully negotiated the weekend morning routine, delivered Ethan to Mrs. Patterson with detailed instructions and emergency contacts, and was standing in his bedroom staring at the suit that did, miraculously, still fit. Navy blue, conservative, professional. The tie took 3 attempts to get right. Ryan was out of practice with formal wear, but eventually he looked like someone who belonged at an elegant wedding, different from his usual self, which was perhaps the point. Tonight he wasn't Ryan the analyst, Ryan the father. Tonight he was just Ryan, friend of the groom, participant in celebration, allowed to exist outside his usual boundaries for a few hours. The Grandview estate was exactly as elegant as its website promised. Ryan arrived early, habit, not nervousness, and found himself in a reception area already filling with guests. The ceremony wouldn't start for 40 minutes, leaving time for the awkward mingling that preceded all formal events. He recognized a few faces from college, exchanged greetings and brief updates with people he'd once known well, and now knew only through social media highlights. Everyone had aged in the same 8 years since graduation, but differently. Some carrying weight, others looking lighter, all of them wearing the particular polish that came with approaching middle age in professional careers. Ryan Walker, you magnificent bastard! Marcus appeared from the crowd, looking genuinely happy in a way that made the expensive suit and meticulous styling irrelevant. You came. I RSVP'd, didn't I? Yeah, but I thought you might chicken out. Marcus pulled him into a hug, the kind of greeting that communicated real affection without needing words. How's Ethan? Good, growing, thinks he's too old for dinosaurs now, which is objectively wrong. He's 6. Everything's wrong at 6. Marcus grinned. Come on, let me introduce you to Jennifer before I have to go do groom things. That's Jennifer Hartley was lovely in the effortless way that some people achieved. Warm, present, genuinely interested when Marcus introduced Ryan as his college roommate and best man who couldn't be best man because of complicated life stuff. She asked about Ethan with the specific questions that indicated Marcus had told her about Ryan's situation, but without pity. Without the particular tone people sometimes used with single parents. Marcus says you're the reason he passed statistics, she said, smiling, which means you're partially responsible for him getting his MBA, which means you're partially responsible for us meeting, so thank you. That's a generous interpretation of me explaining correlation versus causation at 2 a.m. Ryan found himself relaxing slightly, the social anxiety that usually accompanied these events softening. But you're welcome. They talked for a few more minutes before a wedding coordinator materialized to extract Marcus for photos. Jennifer excused herself to deal with some detail about centerpieces, and Ryan found himself alone again in a room full of people he mostly didn't know. He was considering whether it would be rude to check his phone. Mrs. Patterson would text if there was any problem, but the lack of texts was somehow more anxiety-inducing than receiving them. When someone spoke from just behind his shoulder, "You look like you're calculating the socially acceptable time before you can leave." Ryan turned, response already forming, and stopped. Claire Monroe stood 3 feet away, elegant in a dress that somehow made formal wear look effortless, holding a glass of champagne with the same composed authority she brought to boardrooms. Her dark hair was different, styled for evening rather than business, but her eyes were the same, sharp, assessing, missing nothing. For a moment, Ryan's carefully separated worlds collided with enough force that he forgot how to speak. Miss Monroe. His voice sounded strange, too formal, but what else could he say? She was his CEO. They were at a wedding. These facts didn't reconcile. I didn't know you'd be here. Claire, please. We're not at the office. She smiled slightly, and Ryan realized he'd never seen her smile before. Not really. And I didn't know you'd be here either. How do you know, Marcus? College roommates. We lived together for 3 years. Ryan was aware that he was explaining too much, filling silence with unnecessary information, but his brain had short-circuited slightly. You? Jennifer and I went to law school together before I made the questionable decision to pursue business instead. We've stayed close. Claire's gaze was steady, direct, the same way she looked at people in meetings, but somehow different without the buffer of professional context. I've never seen you at company social events. I don't usually attend. The truth came out automatically before Ryan could filter it. I have a son. Evenings are complicated. I know. At Ryan's expression, she continued, You mentioned him once in a meeting about family-friendly benefit policies. You asked about extended aftercare hours. She remembered that. A comment Ryan had made 8 months ago, barely a sentence in a larger discussion. He'd thought it had disappeared into the general noise of corporate input. Right. Ryan shifted his weight, suddenly aware that he was standing in a formal reception space having a conversation with his CEO that felt nothing like any interaction they'd ever had. Well, I managed to find childcare for tonight. Special occasion. It's a good wedding for a special occasion. Claire's tone was conversational, easy, as if they did this regularly. Though I'll admit I'm calculating exit strategies too. These events are wonderful until they're exhausting. Ryan laughed before he could stop himself. I gave myself until 9:30. After that, I turn into a pumpkin and have to get home before my sitter charges overtime. Practical. Claire's smile widened slightly. I respect that. A chime sounded, the signal to move toward the ceremony space. The crowd began shifting, conversations fragmenting as people found their seats. Ryan saw his opportunity to escape, to restore the professional distance that had somehow dissolved in 3 minutes of conversation. I should find my seat, he said. Enjoy the wedding. You too. Claire raised her champagne glass slightly, a gesture that felt like acknowledgement of something Ryan couldn't quite name. See you Monday, Ryan. She used his first name. At work, it was always Mr. Walker. In the rare moments she addressed him directly. First names were for colleagues, for equals, for people who existed in the same sphere. Ryan made his way to the ceremony space, found his assigned seat in a row designated for Marcus's college friends, and tried to calm the strange acceleration in his chest that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with the way Claire Monroe had looked at him when she smiled. This was fine. This was manageable. They'd had a brief conversation at a social event, nothing more. By Monday, it would fade back into professional distance, separate spheres, the careful compartmentalization that kept Ryan's life functional. The ceremony began. Traditional, beautiful, surprisingly moving. Ryan watched Marcus and Jennifer exchange vows with the particular emotion that weddings always created, happiness for his friend, combined with the complicated weight of his own failed marriage, the reminder that promises didn't guarantee outcomes. But there was hope, too. Sitting in that elegant space, surrounded by celebration, Ryan allowed himself to believe that some people got it right, that commitment wasn't always disaster, that maybe the capacity for connection didn't die just because it had been wounded. The ceremony concluded with applause and joy. Guests rose, moving toward the reception space where dinner and dancing waited. Ryan followed the crowd, determined to be present, to celebrate his friend, to exist outside his usual boundaries for a few hours. He was looking for his table assignment when someone touched his arm lightly. We're at the same table. Claire stood beside him, close enough that Ryan could smell her perfume, something subtle, expensive, nothing like the generic fragrances that filled the office. Table 7, this way. Ryan followed because refusing would be more awkward than accepting, and found himself at a table with 6 other people. Jennifer's law school classmates, people he didn't know but who knew each other well enough that conversation flowed easily once introductions were made. Claire sat directly across from him, positioned so that every time Ryan looked up from his plate, he risked meeting her eyes. This was going to be a very long dinner. But it wasn't. Somehow, impossibly, it wasn't. Conversation at the table moved through the usual wedding topics. How the bride and groom met, mutual friends, professional updates delivered with practiced brevity. Claire participated with the same composed intelligence she brought to everything, but without the edge that came with corporate authority. She asked questions, listened to answers, made observations that revealed a sense of humor Ryan had never seen in board meetings. "So, you're the CEO Marcus mentioned." One of Jennifer's friends, Amanda, maybe, addressed Claire with the particular interest people brought to proximity to power. "Meridian Technologies, right? That's the AI integration company." Among other things, Claire's response was polite but minimal, deflecting without shutting down. "We do a range of enterprise solutions." Claire doesn't like talking about work at social events. Jennifer smiled warmly, clearly familiar with this dynamic. She says she spends enough time being CEO during business hours. Guilty. Claire raised her wine glass in acknowledgement. "Tonight, I'm just the friend who met Jennifer when we were both terrible at evidence and bonded over shared confusion." The table laughed, conversation shifting, but Ryan caught something in that exchange, a boundary being drawn, a separation between professional identity and personal self that he understood intimately. Claire Monroe, CEO, was different from Claire, law school friend. Just as Ryan the analyst was different from Ryan, the father was different from Ryan, college roommate of the groom. They were all performing versions of themselves. The question was which version was most true. Dinner arrived in courses. Elegant, probably expensive, the kind of meal that wedding budgets allowed. Ryan ate and participated in conversation when addressed, but mostly observed, a skill he'd developed over years of existing in spaces without demanding attention. He was learning things about Claire that no amount of company newsletters would reveal. She was funny, in a dry way that surprised people. She'd apparently gone skydiving once and hated it. She was passionate about local theater, had season tickets she rarely used because work consumed her schedule. She spoke about Jennifer with genuine affection, the kind that came from years of friendship that survived different life paths. She was human, complicated, real. It was disorienting. "Ryan." Claire's voice pulled him from observation. She was looking at him directly, and the table had gone quiet in that way that indicated he'd missed something. "I asked how you manage work-life balance with a young child." Everyone was watching now, interested in his answer, and Ryan felt the familiar tension of being visible when he preferred transparency. Carefully, he went for honesty instead of deflection. "I prioritize ruthlessly. Work gets my focus from 8 to 5. Home gets everything after. Things that don't fit in those boundaries mostly don't happen." "That's why you don't do company social events," Claire said, and it wasn't a question. "Yeah, I'd rather have dinner with my son than network at happy hour." Ryan paused, then added, "No offense to company culture." "None taken. I think that's admirable." Claire's expression was thoughtful, serious. "Too many people sacrifice what matters for what's expected. You've chosen differently." "I didn't really choose. My ex-wife left when Ethan was 4. Joint custody didn't work out, so it's just us." Ryan wasn't sure why he was sharing this, why Claire's attention made him want to be honest. "You adapt, or you fail." "I adapted." The table had gone quiet in a different way now, the particular silence that followed personal revelation. But Claire didn't look away, didn't offer empty platitudes. "That takes real strength," she said simply. "The kind that doesn't show up on performance reviews but matters more than anything that does." Their eyes held for a moment longer than comfortable, and Ryan felt something shift. Not attraction, exactly, though that was there too. Recognition. The sense that she understood not just his words, but the weight beneath them. The moment broke when Jennifer stood to signal the transition to dancing. The table dispersed, people moving toward the bar or the floor, or smaller conversation clusters. Ryan excused himself, heading toward the restroom more to create distance than from actual need. He was washing his hands, staring at his reflection in the elegant mirror, when he admitted the truth he'd been avoiding all evening. He was attracted to Claire Monroe. Had been, probably, since the first time he'd seen her command a boardroom with quiet authority. But attraction from a distance was manageable. Attraction sitting across a dinner table, watching her laugh, hearing her speak about things that mattered. That was dangerous. Because Claire Monroe wasn't just his CEO. She was someone with power over his career, his stability, his ability to provide for Ethan. Any involvement beyond professional would be complicated at best, disastrous at worst. And Ryan had learned to avoid disaster, to choose safety over risk, to protect what he'd built even when protection meant denying what he felt. He returned to the reception determined to maintain distance, to be polite but unavailable, to survive the rest of the evening without creating complications. The universe, apparently, had other plans. The ceremony music had shifted to reception music, something upbeat, encouraging dancing. Ryan found a spot near the edge of the room, content to observe rather than participate, when Claire appeared beside him again. "You're hiding." She stated it as fact, not accusation. "I'm observing." Ryan gestured toward the dance floor where Marcus and Jennifer were leading the traditional first dance. "There's a difference." "Not much of one." Claire stood next to him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Are you always this careful?" The question was direct, precise, the kind that eliminated deflection. Ryan considered lying, decided against it. "Yes. Careful keeps things stable. Stable is what my son needs." "What about what you need?" Ryan turned to look at her fully. In the low light of the reception, with music and celebration surrounding them, Claire looked different from the woman who ran board meetings. Softer, but no less formidable. Human, but still somehow untouchable. "What I need doesn't matter as much as what he needs." "That's not true." Claire's voice was quiet but firm. "You can't build a life only on sacrifice. Eventually, there's nothing left." "Is that experience talking?" "Maybe." She smiled slightly, sadly. "I've built a career on sacrificing personal for professional. It works until it doesn't. Until you realize you've optimized for success and forgotten to optimize for living." Ryan didn't know what to say to that, to this sudden vulnerability from someone he'd only known as composed and controlled. But before he could respond, the music changed, something slower, inviting couples to the floor. Claire extended her hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request from a CEO to an employee. It was an invitation from one person to another, offered in a moment that existed outside their usual context. Ryan could decline, should decline, could maintain the boundaries that kept his life manageable. He took her hand. The dance floor was crowded enough that they wouldn't be particularly noticeable, anonymous in a room full of couples. Claire moved with the same grace she brought to everything, and Ryan followed her lead, trying to remember how to do this. How to exist in proximity to someone without the protective buffer of professional distance. "You're tense." Claire's observation was gentle. "I promise I don't bite outside of contract negotiations." "Sorry, I'm out of practice with dancing and with—" Ryan trailed off, unsure how to finish. "With being close to someone?" "Yeah." They moved in silence for a moment, and Ryan became aware of everything. Claire's hand in his, her other hand resting lightly on his shoulder, the warmth of her, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way she looked at him with those sharp eyes that seemed to see past every defense he'd carefully constructed. "Can I tell you something?" Claire's voice was barely audible over the music. "I noticed you months ago, at work." Ryan's heart did something complicated. "What?" "In meetings. The way you think before you speak. The way you ask questions that actually matter. The way you left that benefits discussion to pick up your son and didn't apologize for it, just stated it as fact." She paused. "I noticed. I tried not to be noticed." "I know. That's what made it noticeable." Claire's smile was rueful. "Do you have any idea how rare it is to find someone who doesn't perform for attention, who just does good work and goes home to what matters?" Ryan couldn't breathe properly. This was wrong, dangerous, everything he'd tried to avoid. But Claire's hand was warm in his, and her eyes were honest, and for the first time in 2 years, Ryan wanted something beyond stability. This can't happen. He said it out loud, naming the truth. You're my CEO. I have a child who depends on me keeping my job. The risk is too high. I know. Claire didn't look away, didn't pretend otherwise. I know all the reasons this is complicated, but I'm tired of living entirely in the logical space, of making every decision based on optimization. Sometimes the right thing isn't the safe thing. And sometimes it is. Ryan forced himself to maintain eye contact, to be as honest as she was being. I can't afford mistakes. Ethan can't afford me making choices based on what I want instead of what's stable. Is that what this would be? A mistake? The music was ending, other couples beginning to separate, return to tables or the bar or other conversations. Ryan and Claire stood still, caught in a moment that had stretched beyond the boundaries of a simple dance. I don't know, Ryan admitted finally, but I can't risk finding out. Something flickered across Claire's expression. Disappointment, understanding, resignation. She stepped back, creating the professional distance Ryan had requested, but her eyes held his for one more moment. You're right. Of course you're right. Her voice had shifted, becoming more controlled, more like the CEO he knew from meetings. I apologize if I made things awkward. That wasn't my intention. You didn't. Ryan wanted to say more, to explain that his refusal wasn't rejection, but protection, that under different circumstances he might choose differently. But what was the point? Circumstances were what they were. Thank you for the dance. Claire nodded, professional again, and turned to join a group of Jennifer's friends near the bar. Ryan watched her go, feeling the particular ache of choosing safety over desire, stability over risk. He stayed for another hour, long enough to congratulate Marcus properly, to make his presence count, to fulfill the social obligation that had brought him here. But his mind was elsewhere, caught in the impossible space between what he wanted and what he could afford to want. By 9:20, Ryan was in his car, driving home through Saturday night traffic, trying to convince himself he'd made the right choice. Mrs. Patterson reported that Ethan had been perfect. Homework done, dinner eaten, bedtime routine completed without resistance. Ryan paid her, added the generous tip he always included, and waited until she left before going to his son's room. Ethan was asleep, one arm wrapped around Mr. Bear despite his insistence that he was too old for stuffed animals. Ryan stood in the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of his son's breathing, and felt the choices he'd made solidify into certainty. This was what mattered. This small person who trusted him, needed him, depended on him to be stable and present and reliable. Whatever Ryan had felt on that dance floor, whatever Claire had offered, it paled against the weight of this responsibility. He'd chosen correctly. He was sure of it. So why did it feel like loss? Monday morning arrived with its usual demands. Ryan executed the familiar choreography: breakfast, school drop-off, commute, with mechanical precision, trying not to think about the weekend, about Claire, about words that couldn't be unsaid. The office felt different, though objectively nothing had changed. Same cubicle, same colleagues, same work. But Ryan carried the knowledge of Saturday night into every interaction, wondering if Claire remembered, if she regretted her honesty, if everything was about to become impossibly complicated. He made it until 10:30 before Jessica appeared at his cubicle, her expression somewhere between excited and concerned. Did you hear? Ryan looked up from his report, already tired. Hear what? Claire Monroe just announced a restructure of the leadership development program. She's personally mentoring the selected candidates. Jessica leaned against the cubicle wall, lowering her voice. And apparently she added names to the list. So, people who didn't even apply. Ryan's stomach did something unpleasant. Who? They haven't announced yet, but rumor is she's including people who show authentic leadership qualities that don't seek attention. Jessica air-quoted the phrase, which sounds like classic Monroe, finding value in unexpected places. That's good, Ryan managed. The company needs diverse leadership. True, but also, Jessica hesitated. People are talking, wondering what criteria she's really using. You know how it is. Ryan did know. Corporate environments thrived on speculation, on reading meaning into every executive decision, on wondering who had access and why. If Claire had noticed Ryan months ago, if she'd seen something worth mentoring, people would wonder about that attention, would question it, would make it into something it wasn't, or worse, would make it into exactly what it was. His phone buzzed. An email notification from Claire Monroe's office. Subject: Leadership Development Program. Ryan opened it with hands that weren't quite steady. Mr. Walker, you've been selected for the Monroe PSME initiative based on your consistent demonstration of strategic thinking, effective communication, and authentic leadership principles. The program begins next month and requires a commitment of approximately 8 hours per week, including evening sessions. I understand this may present scheduling challenges given your family obligations. Please let me know if you're able to participate, and we can discuss accommodation options if needed. Regards, Claire Monroe. Professional. Formal. Exactly what an email from a CEO to a selected employee should be. Nothing in it suggested Saturday night had happened, that they danced, that she'd told him she'd noticed him months ago. But the selection itself was the message. She'd heard him say he couldn't risk this, and she'd responded by offering professional opportunity. Not romance, not complication, but advancement on merit. The kind of thing that would benefit his career, his stability, his ability to provide for Ethan. It was generous. It was appropriate. It was exactly what Ryan should want. He stared at the email for a long time before typing his response. Miss Monroe, thank you for this opportunity. I'm honored to be selected and will make the scheduling work. Please let me know the next steps. Respectfully, Ryan Walker. He hit send before he could reconsider, before he could analyze what accepting meant, what proximity to Claire would require. This was professional development, leadership training, the kind of opportunity that came rarely and shouldn't be refused just because his feelings were complicated. The rest of the day passed in the usual rhythm. Meetings, reports, client calls. Ryan worked late, not excessively, but enough to clear his desk before tomorrow's demands. He picked up Ethan, made dinner, supervised homework, and acted bedtime. But as he sat alone in his living room after Ethan slept, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about Claire's words on that dance floor. Sometimes the right thing isn't the safe thing. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe safety was always right when you had a child depending on you. Or maybe, and this was the thought Ryan couldn't quite silence, maybe choosing only safety meant never really living at all. He didn't have answers, only questions, and the strange sense that something fundamental had shifted, that the careful compartments he'd built around his life had developed cracks that no amount of caution could fully seal. Ryan Walker, who'd learned to measure time in small increments, who'd built a life on precision and separation, was beginning to understand that some things couldn't be measured or separated. Some things simply existed, messy and complicated and real, regardless of whether you had room for them in your carefully constructed world. The wedding had changed something. What exactly, Ryan couldn't yet say, but he suspected he was about to find out. The first leadership development session was scheduled for Thursday evening at 6:30, which meant Ryan had exactly 15 minutes between leaving the office and needing to be back in the executive conference room on the 42nd floor. Not enough time to go home. Barely enough time to call Ethan at aftercare and confirm homework was started. Definitely not enough time to process the fact that he'd be spending the next 2 hours in close quarters with Claire Monroe and 7 other people who'd somehow earned her attention. Ryan used those 15 minutes to grab coffee from the lobby cafe and mentally prepare himself for professional distance. This was career development, nothing more. Whatever had happened at the wedding was irrelevant. They were CEO and employee, mentor and mentee, existing in clearly defined roles that didn't include dance floors or whispered confessions or the way Claire's hand had felt in his. He was the last to arrive. The conference room held 8 chairs arranged in a loose circle, deliberately informal, Ryan noted, and 7 were already occupied. Ryan recognized most of the faces. Jessica from brand strategy, 2 senior analysts from finance, someone from HR whose name he couldn't remember, and 3 others he'd seen around but never worked with directly. All talented, all ambitious, all looking slightly nervous about what this program would demand. Claire stood near the window, silhouetted against the city lights just beginning to emerge in the early evening. She turned as Ryan entered, and for a fraction of a second their eyes met with the weight of everything unspoken. Then her expression shifted to professional warmth, the same she'd offered everyone else. "Ryan, good. We're all here." She gestured to the empty chair, positioned directly across from where she'd be sitting, of course. "Let's get started." Ryan sat, and the program began. For the next 2 hours, Claire led them through a discussion on authentic leadership that was nothing like the corporate training Ryan had endured at previous jobs. No PowerPoint slides, no buzzwords about synergy or paradigm shifts, no pretense that leadership was a formula you could memorize and execute. Instead, Claire asked questions that forced them to examine their own assumptions about power, influence, and responsibility. "Leadership isn't about having the right answers," she said at one point, her gaze moving across the circle but landing on Ryan with particular weight. "It's about asking the right questions and creating space for others to answer them. The moment you pretend to have certainty you don't possess, you've lost the ability to lead effectively." Jessica jumped in with an example from a recent project where admitting uncertainty had actually strengthened her team's trust. Others shared similar stories, and the conversation flowed with surprising honesty. Ryan listened more than he spoke, observing the way Claire guided discussion without dominating it, how she drew out insights from quieter participants, how she challenged assumptions without making people defensive. She was brilliant at this. Not just intelligent, Ryan had known that, but genuinely skilled at seeing potential in others and creating conditions for it to emerge. Watching her work was like watching a masterclass in human dynamics. "Ryan," Claire's voice pulled him from observation. "You've been quiet. What's your perspective on the question of balancing organizational needs against individual team member circumstances?" The question was general enough that anyone could answer it, but Ryan heard the subtext. She was asking about what he'd told her at the wedding, about prioritizing ruthlessly, about choosing his son over networking. She was asking him to share that philosophy with the group, to make visible what he usually kept private. He could deflect, could give a safe corporate answer about flexibility and accommodation, could maintain the careful separation between Ryan the employee and Ryan the father. But Claire's eyes held a challenge, and something in Ryan refused to back down. "I think we pretend there's more separation between work and life than actually exists," he said slowly, working through the thought as he spoke. "We tell people to balance, to compartmentalize, to leave personal issues at home. But that's not realistic. If someone on my team is dealing with a sick parent or a struggling kid or any real human crisis, that affects their work, whether we acknowledge it or not. Better to acknowledge it, to build flexibility into expectations, than to pretend people are machines that can optimize performance regardless of circumstances." "That sounds inefficient," one of the finance analysts said, not unkindly. "How do you maintain productivity if you're constantly accommodating individual situations?" "You don't maintain it. You optimize for sustainability instead of short-term output." Ryan was surprised by his own certainty. A team member who feels supported through a crisis will give you years of loyalty and elevated performance. A team member who feels forced to choose between work and life will give you resentment and eventual departure. The math isn't complicated. Claire's expression was unreadable, but something in her posture had shifted, a slight lean forward, increased attention. "And how do you determine which circumstances warrant accommodation versus which are just excuses?" "You trust people until they prove untrustworthy. You assume good faith until evidence suggests otherwise." Ryan met her eyes directly. "Most people want to do good work. If someone's struggling, it's usually because of real obstacles, not manufactured ones. Leadership means removing obstacles, not adding skepticism." The room had gone quiet in a way that suggested his answer had landed with more impact than intended. Jessica was nodding slowly. Others looked thoughtful. Claire held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary before turning to the group. "That's a perfect example of what I mean by authentic leadership. Ryan's philosophy doesn't come from a textbook. It comes from lived experience, from having to navigate exactly the kind of circumstances we're discussing. That's the kind of wisdom I want you all to develop. Not theoretical frameworks, but practical understanding of what actually works when leading real humans through real challenges." The session continued for another hour, covering topics from decision-making under uncertainty to building psychological safety within teams. By the time Claire called it to a close at 8:40, Ryan's mind was full, and his phone had 3 texts from Mrs. Patterson confirming Ethan was fed, bathed, and asking when Dad would be home. People gathered their things, some lingering to ask Claire follow-up questions, others heading out with promises to complete the assigned reading before next week's session. Ryan was sliding his laptop into his bag when Claire appeared beside him. "Can you stay for a minute?" It wasn't a request he could refuse, even if he wanted to. Ryan nodded to Jessica as she left, then turned to face Claire as the room emptied. They stood 3 feet apart, the conference table between them, the city lights casting shadows across Claire's features. Professional distance, Ryan reminded himself. That's all this was. "Your contribution tonight was valuable." Claire's tone was measured, careful. Exactly the kind of perspective this program needs. "Thank you." Ryan hesitated, then added, "I wasn't sure if accepting the invitation was appropriate, given what happened at the wedding." Claire finished the thought he couldn't quite voice. "I want to be clear about something, Ryan. Your selection for this program had nothing to do with personal feelings. I've been watching your work for months, your strategic thinking, your team dynamics, your results. You earned this opportunity on merit. I believe you." And he did. Claire Monroe didn't compromise professional standards for personal reasons, but that didn't eliminate the complication. It's just, people talk. If I'm receiving mentorship from you, and if there's any perception that it's because of something other than performance, then we make sure there's no basis for that perception. Claire's voice was firm. This program has clear metrics, documented outcomes, peer evaluation components, everything transparent, everything justified. Okay. Ryan wanted to believe it was that simple, that professional structures could contain personal complications indefinitely. "And what about—" He couldn't finish. "What about what I feel when I look at you? What about the fact that I haven't stopped thinking about that dance? What about the way you saw me, really saw me, and it felt like coming home to something I didn't know I'd lost?" "What about maintaining appropriate boundaries?" Claire supplied, reading the question he couldn't ask. "We do exactly that. You're a program participant. I'm your mentor. We interact within those parameters and nowhere else." "Right. Professional only." "Professional only." Claire's expression was controlled, but Ryan caught something in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or resignation. "For what it's worth, I meant what I said at the wedding. About noticing you. About respecting how you've built your life. But you were right about the risk. Some things aren't worth jeopardizing what matters most." "Ethan matters most," Ryan said, and it wasn't a question. "I know, that's part of what I noticed." Claire smiled slightly, sadly. "You're a good father, Ryan. Don't let anything, including this program, including me, compromise that." There was finality in her tone, a door closing on possibilities that had barely opened. Ryan should have felt relieved. This was the outcome he'd chosen, the boundary he'd insisted on. Clarity was good, structure was safe. So why did it hurt? "I should go," Ryan gestured toward the door. "Mrs. Patterson charges overtime after 9. "Of course. See you next week." Ryan left the conference room, rode the elevator down 42 floors, walked to his car through the parking garage that echoed with footsteps. He drove home on autopilot, his mind stuck on Claire's face when she'd said some things aren't worth jeopardizing what matters most. She was right. Of course she was right. But right didn't make it easier. Mrs. Patterson met him at the door with her usual efficiency, reporting that Ethan had been wonderful and was already asleep. Ryan paid her, waited until she left, then stood in his quiet living room feeling the particular loneliness that came from choosing correctly. He checked on Ethan, asleep, peaceful, trusting that Dad would always make the safe choice, and felt his resolve solidify. This was what mattered. This small person who needed stability more than Ryan needed romance, who deserved a father focused on him rather than distracted by complications. Ryan had made the right choice. He would keep making it, no matter how much it cost. Now, the next 3 weeks fell into a new rhythm. Ryan attended Thursday evening sessions, contributed to discussions, completed assignments that pushed him to examine his leadership assumptions. Claire maintained perfect professionalism, challenging his thinking, offering guidance, treating him exactly like every other participant. No private conversations, no lingering looks, no acknowledgement of anything beyond mentor and mentee. It should have been enough. It was enough, Ryan told himself repeatedly. Work continued its usual demands. Ryan managed campaigns, analyzed data, sat through meetings where he contributed just enough to be valuable without being visible. He picked up Ethan every day at 3:15, helped with homework that was getting progressively harder as first grade advanced, made dinners that balanced nutrition with a 6-year-old's limited palate. Life was stable, predictable, exactly what Ryan had optimized for. But something had shifted. The careful compartments that had worked for 2 years were developing cracks Ryan couldn't quite seal. He caught himself thinking about Claire at odd moments, during breakfast when Ethan asked about his day, during client calls when someone made a particularly insightful point, late at night when the house was quiet and Ryan's mind wandered to places it shouldn't. He remembered things she'd said, the way she'd looked at him during that dance, how her hand had felt in his. He replayed their conversation in the conference room, looking for subtext, for any sign that she was struggling as much as he was with this forced distance. Professional only. That's what they'd agreed. Ryan was discovering that agreement and execution were very different things. "Dad, you're not listening." Ethan's voice cut through Ryan's distraction. They were at the dinner table, Wednesday night, pasta with the specific ratio of butter to parmesan that Ethan demanded, and Ryan had apparently missed an entire story about something that happened at recess. "Sorry, buddy, tell me again." Ethan sighed with the particular exasperation children reserve for distracted parents. "I said Tommy's dad is coaching our soccer team this year, and there's practice on Saturdays, and can I play?" Soccer, Saturdays. Another variable in an already complex schedule, another commitment requiring logistics and planning. Ryan's first instinct was to say no, to protect the weekend structure they'd established, to avoid complications. But Ethan was looking at him with hopeful eyes, waiting for permission to do something normal, something other kids did without requiring extensive parental calculation. "Yeah, okay, we can make that work." Ryan made the decision quickly, before caution could override it. "We'll need to adjust movie night, but soccer sounds good." "Really?" Ethan's face lit up with uncomplicated joy. "Tommy said his dad is really good at coaching and they do drills and everything. Then you'll learn a lot." Ryan smiled, pushing away the mental calculations of Saturday morning timing and whether he could still handle grocery shopping and laundry. "When's the first practice?" "This Saturday. Can you come watch?" Ryan pulled out his phone, checking his calendar. Saturday was clear. He'd deliberately kept weekends unstructured, flexible, available for Ethan. "Of course I'll watch. Wouldn't miss it." They finished dinner with Ethan chattering about soccer positions and who would be on the team, his enthusiasm filling the space Ryan's distraction had created. By the time bedtime arrived, Ethan was too excited to sleep, requiring 3 stories and a promise that they'd go shopping for cleats this week. Ryan finally got him settled at 9:15, exhausted but satisfied. This was what fatherhood meant: showing up, saying yes when you wanted to say no, rearranging your life around a 6-year-old's needs without making it feel like sacrifice. He was cleaning up the kitchen when his phone buzzed with an email notification. From Claire, sent to all program participants, but Ryan's pulse still accelerated when he saw her name. Subject: next session, guest speaker team. Thursday's session will feature a guest speaker, Dr. Sarah Chen, organizational psychologist and expert on leadership under stress. Please come prepared to discuss times you've had to lead through personal or professional crisis. The topic is challenging, but important. Real leadership reveals itself not in optimal conditions, but in how we navigate difficulty. See you Thursday, Claire. Ryan read it twice, parsing the professional language for any hidden message meant specifically for him. There wasn't one. This was a group email, nothing more. But the topic hit close to home. Leading through crisis. Ryan had been doing exactly that for 2 years, navigating single parenthood, divorce, rebuilding a career while maintaining stability for a child who hadn't asked for any of this disruption. The question was whether he wanted to share that story with 7 colleagues and the woman who'd told him she noticed him months ago. Thursday arrived with its usual demands. Ryan worked through lunch to clear his schedule, made sure his afternoon deliverables were complete, and at 6:25 was riding the elevator to the 42nd floor with the nervous energy that preceded these sessions. The conference room was already half full when he arrived. Jessica waved him over to an empty seat beside her, and Ryan sat, trying not to notice that he was no longer positioned directly across from Claire. Someone had rearranged the chairs into a slightly different configuration, breaking the visual connection that had characterized previous sessions. Deliberate or coincidence? Claire entered at exactly 6:30, accompanied by a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an air of calm authority. Dr. Sarah Chen, presumably. She settled into the circle with comfortable confidence while Claire made introductions. Dr. Chen has worked with Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and government agencies on leadership development, Claire explained. She specializes in how leaders maintain effectiveness during periods of extreme stress or rapid change. I've asked her to facilitate tonight's discussion because I think her perspective will challenge some of our assumptions. Dr. Chen smiled. Thank you, Claire. Let me start by saying that leadership books and seminars love to focus on triumph, the successful pivot, the brilliant strategy, the team victory. But real leadership happens in the messy middle, when nothing's working, when you're exhausted, when you're not sure you can keep going, but people are depending on you anyway. She paused, letting that settle. So tonight, I want to hear your messy middle stories. Times you had to lead when you felt least equipped to do so. Silence filled the room, the particular quiet that preceded vulnerability. Jessica spoke first, sharing a story about managing a team through a major product failure, how she'd had to maintain morale while internally panicking about her own job security. Others followed, a restructure that eliminated half a department, a family medical crisis that happened during a critical project deadline, professional mistakes that required public acknowledgement and correction. Each story revealed the gap between the polished professional personas they showed the world and the complicated humans beneath. Dr. Chen listened with focused attention, asking questions that pushed them deeper, that forced them to examine not just what happened, but how they'd navigated the emotional weight of leadership under duress. Ryan listened, contributed to the discussion when asked, but kept his own story private. These were his colleagues. Sharing professional challenges was one thing. Exposing the full reality of single parenthood felt like crossing a line he wasn't ready to cross. But Dr. Chen had noticed his silence. Ryan, you've been quiet. I'd like to hear your perspective. Her tone was gentle but firm. What's a time you had to lead through crisis? Ryan felt 8 pairs of eyes on him, waiting. Claire's expression was neutral, professional, giving nothing away. He could offer something work-related, keep it safe, maintain the separation between public and private self. Instead, he heard himself say, "My divorce." The words hung in the air, more honest than intended. My ex-wife left when our son was 4, Ryan continued, committed now to truth. She wanted joint custody initially, but she couldn't handle the actual work of parenting, so it became just me and Ethan, and I had to figure out how to be enough parent, enough stability, enough of everything, while rebuilding my career and not falling apart. He paused, aware that his voice had roughened. I didn't have a team to lead in the traditional sense, but I had a 4-year-old looking at me to make sense of his world falling apart. That's leadership. Every day showing up when you're exhausted, making decisions when you're terrified, pretending you have answers when you're barely holding together yourself. The room had gone completely still. Dr. Chen's expression was thoughtful, but Ryan couldn't look at Claire, couldn't see her reaction to this exposure of everything he usually kept hidden. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Dr. Chen said quietly. The kind of leadership that doesn't come with a title or recognition, but requires more strength than most executive positions ever will. How did you maintain that over time? 2 years, you said? 2 years and 3 months. Ryan's precision came automatically. I maintain it by compartmentalizing, by being ruthlessly selective about what gets my attention, by accepting that I can't do everything, so I focus on what matters most. Ethan matters most. Everything else is secondary. Including your own needs? The question was direct, challenging. Especially my own needs. Ryan met Dr. Chen's eyes steadily. When you're a single parent, your needs become irrelevant, or at least they can't take priority. That's the trade-off. Is it? Dr. Chen tilted her head slightly. Or is that a story you tell yourself to justify a particular form of self-sacrifice? Ryan felt defensive surge through him. It's not a story. It's reality. I have limited time, limited energy, limited resources. Focusing on my son isn't sacrifice, it's priorities. I'm not questioning your priorities. I'm questioning whether the binary you've created, Ethan's needs versus your own, is actually serving either of you well. Dr. Chen's voice remained gentle despite the challenge. What does your son learn about relationships, about self-worth, about emotional health? If he watches his father consistently deny his own needs in service of parenting? The question landed like a physical blow. Ryan didn't have an answer. Claire spoke for the first time since Dr. Chen had taken over. I think what Dr. Chen is suggesting is that sustainable leadership, whether in an organization or a family, requires acknowledging that the leader is also human, also has needs, also deserves care. Martyr leadership eventually fails because it's built on depletion rather than renewal. Exactly. Dr. Chen nodded. Ryan, what you've accomplished is remarkable, genuinely impressive. But I'd encourage you to examine whether the compartmentalization that helped you survive the immediate crisis might now be preventing you from actually living. There's a difference between managing and thriving. Ryan wanted to argue, to defend the structure that had kept him functional for 2 years, but something in him recognized the truth beneath the challenge. He'd been managing, not thriving, surviving, not living, protecting Ethan from instability while maybe also protecting himself from risk. The session moved on to other topics, but Ryan remained stuck on that exchange, turning it over in his mind. When they finally broke at 8:40, he packed his things slowly, aware that Claire was dismissing other participants, that she might want to speak with him privately again. She did. Ryan, her voice was quiet, meant only for him. That took courage, what you shared tonight. Or stupidity, I'm not sure which. Ryan zipped his laptop bag, buying time before he had to look at her. Courage. Claire's certainty was absolute. Do you know how rare it is for someone to be that honest in a professional setting? To admit vulnerability without apology? Feels more like weakness. It's not. Claire moved closer, close enough that Ryan could smell her perfume again, that familiar scent that reminded him of the wedding, of dancing, of words whispered that couldn't be taken back. What Dr. Chen said about sustainable leadership requiring renewal, she's right. About organizational leadership and about what you're doing as a father. Ryan finally looked at her. Are you speaking as my mentor or as someone who cares about your well-being? Claire's eyes held his with intensity that felt nothing like professional distance. You've built something remarkable with Ethan, but you're also hollowing yourself out in the process, and that's not sustainable. Eventually, there won't be anything left. What else am I supposed to do? Risk his stability for my own, what? Happiness? That's selfish. Is it? Or is it modeling for him what healthy adulthood actually looks like? Claire's voice was passionate now, forgetting the careful neutrality she'd maintained for weeks. What happens when he grows up and remembers that his father never dated, never had friendships, never did anything except work and parent? What does that teach him about building a full life? Ryan felt something crack inside him, some wall he'd carefully constructed beginning to crumble. I don't know how to do both. I don't know how to be a good father and also be a person with needs and wants. The bandwidth doesn't exist. Maybe not alone. Claire was very close now, her voice barely above a whisper. But what if you didn't have to do it alone? The question hung between them, heavy with implication, dangerous with possibility. Ryan knew what she was offering, what she was suggesting: partnership, support, a chance at something beyond the isolated existence he'd built. But accepting meant risk, meant potential failure, meant exposing Ethan to the possibility of more disruption, more loss, more proof that adults couldn't be trusted to stay. I can't, Ryan forced the words out. Claire, I can't. The risk is too high. The risk of trying or the risk of never trying? Claire's eyes were bright, emotional in a way Ryan had never seen. Because you're taking a risk right now, Ryan. You're betting that you can sustain this level of isolation indefinitely, that you won't eventually collapse under the weight of doing everything alone. That's a risk too. It's a known risk. I can manage it. Can you? The challenge was gentle but firm. Or are you just better at managing loneliness than you are at managing connection? Ryan didn't have an answer to that. Couldn't offer one. Because Claire was right, and he knew it, but knowing didn't change the fundamental calculation. Ethan's stability mattered more than Ryan's loneliness. It had to. I should go. Ryan stepped back, creating physical distance to match the emotional boundary he was trying to maintain. Thank you for the session, for everything. Claire's expression shifted, resignation replacing hope. Ryan, please. He couldn't hear whatever she was about to say, couldn't withstand another argument for choosing differently. This is already hard enough. He left before she could respond, before his resolve could weaken further, before he could make a choice that felt right in the moment but wrong in its consequences. The drive home was mechanical. The house was quiet. Mrs. Patterson had texted that Ethan fell asleep early, worn out from soccer practice planning with his friends. Ryan paid her, checked on his son, then sat in the dark living room trying to convince himself he'd made the right choice. Again. But Dr. Chen's words kept circling through his mind. What does your son learn if he watches his father consistently deny his own needs? And Claire's question, sharper still. Are you managing loneliness or managing connection? Ryan didn't sleep well that night. He kept thinking about leadership, about sustainability, about the difference between surviving and thriving, about whether the walls he'd built to protect Ethan might also be walls that prevented his son from seeing what healthy adult relationships actually looked like. By Friday morning, Ryan was exhausted and uncertain, questioning every assumption that had seemed solid just days before. And on Saturday, watching Ethan run around a soccer field with uncomplicated joy, Ryan realized something that felt both obvious and devastating. His son was happy, resilient, capable of adapting to change without breaking. The person who couldn't adapt, who couldn't risk connection, who'd built his entire life around fear of disruption, that was Ryan. He'd been so focused on protecting Ethan that he'd forgotten to examine whether Ethan actually needed that level of protection, or whether the protection was really about Ryan's own fear of failing again, of trying and losing, of opening himself up to hurt. Tommy's dad, the soccer coach, struck up a conversation during a water break, friendly, casual, mentioning that a bunch of parents were planning to grab coffee after practice if Ryan wanted to join. Ryan's instinct was to decline, to take Ethan home, to maintain the weekend routine, to avoid the messiness of social connection with people he barely knew. But he thought about Dr. Chen's challenge, about Claire's question, about whether he was managing his life or just managing his fear. Yeah, Ryan heard himself say. Coffee sounds good. It was a small thing, insignificant really, just coffee with other parents, conversation about kids and soccer, and the minor dramas of elementary school life. But it was also a crack in the armor Ryan had built, a tiny opening towards something that looked less like survival and more like actual living. He didn't know what that meant yet, didn't know if he was ready to risk more than coffee with strangers, if he could ever risk what Claire had offered. But maybe, just maybe, he was ready to stop choosing fear by default. Maybe that was enough for now. The coffee turned into 2 hours of conversation Ryan hadn't expected to enjoy. Tommy's dad, Marcus, not the same Marcus getting married, just another Marcus navigating parenthood, was an architect who worked from home and understood the particular challenges of balancing deadlines with school pickups. Sarah, whose daughter played defense, was a single mom who'd been doing this for 3 years and had the exhausted competence Ryan recognized in himself. David and his husband James were new to the neighborhood, their son's first season playing any sport. Grateful for community they were still building. They talked about the logistics of practices and games, about homework battles and screen time negotiations, about the million small decisions that constituted raising children in a world that felt simultaneously more connected and more isolating than the one they'd grown up in. Normal conversation, nothing profound, but Ryan realized halfway through his second cup of coffee that he was relaxed in a way he hadn't been in months, maybe years. You should join our group text, Sarah said as they were packing up, kids sticky with hot chocolate and ready to move on to whatever Saturday held next. We coordinate carpools, share survival strategies, occasionally vent about school administration decisions that make no sense. Ryan hesitated, old instincts suggesting this was more connection than he had bandwidth for. But Ethan was looking at him hopefully, clearly wanting his dad to say yes, to be part of this community he was building for himself. Yeah, okay. Ryan pulled out his phone. That'd be helpful. Sarah added him to the thread, which immediately exploded with messages welcoming him and coordinating next week's practice logistics. Ryan muted the notifications. He wasn't ready for that level of constant communication, but kept the thread accessible. A small opening, like he'd decided. Progress measured in increments. They walked to the car, Ethan chattering about practice and how Tommy's dad said he had good footwork and could he please practice in the backyard when they got home. Ryan agreed, already calculating whether they had time before needing to start laundry and grocery shopping. Dad? Ethan's voice had shifted, becoming more serious in the way that signaled an important question was coming. Are you okay? Ryan glanced at his son, surprised. Yeah, buddy, why? You seem different lately. Not bad different, just different. Ethan frowned, working through thoughts that were probably too complex for 6-year-old vocabulary. Like you're thinking about a lot of stuff. The perceptiveness shouldn't have surprised Ryan anymore, but it still did. I am thinking about some stuff, grown-up stuff, nothing you need to worry about. Is it about work? Or about that lady from the wedding? Ryan nearly drove through a red light. What? The pretty lady you danced with. I saw the picture. Ethan said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, that Ryan needed a moment to process. What picture? Mrs. Patterson showed me. On her phone. She said you looked happy. Ryan's mind raced. Mrs. Patterson must have seen something posted by one of the wedding guests, probably on social media, probably just background in someone's photo from the reception. He'd been so careful to avoid creating any record of that dance, any evidence that could complicate things later. But of course, in the age of smartphones and instant sharing, careful didn't mean invisible. That was my boss, Ryan said carefully, trying to figure out how much honesty was appropriate here. We happened to be at the same wedding. We danced because it was polite. She's your boss? Ethan's eyes widened with the interest children brought to any intersection of their parents' mysterious work life and observable reality. Is she nice? Very nice. Also very professional. Ryan pulled into their driveway, grateful for the change of subject parking provided. Come on, let's practice your footwork before lunch. They spent the next hour in the backyard, Ryan setting up improvised cones from plastic cups, while Ethan dribbled a soccer ball with determined concentration. It was good, this. Physical activity, shared focus, the kind of father-son time that didn't require complicated navigation of emotional territory. Ryan could handle this. What he couldn't handle was the question forming in his mind. If Ethan had seen that picture, who else had? Did people at work know? Had it circulated through the office gossip network that Ryan Walker and Claire Monroe had danced at a wedding, looked happy, seemed like more than just CEO and employee? And if they did know, what would that mean for the careful professional boundaries Ryan and Claire had been trying to maintain? He pushed the worry aside, focusing on Ethan's delight when he successfully completed the footwork drill, on the simple pleasure of watching his son discover competence in something new. This was what mattered, this present moment, this connection, this proof that despite everything, Ryan was doing okay at the thing that counted most. By Sunday afternoon, Ryan had almost convinced himself that the picture was nothing, that Mrs. Patterson's comment meant nothing, that he was overthinking a casual observation from a kind neighbor who'd simply noticed Ryan looked happy in a photo. Then his phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. So, when were you going to mention you danced with Claire Monroe at that wedding? Ryan stared at his phone, dread settling in his stomach. He typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, it was a wedding. People dance at weddings. 3 dots appeared immediately. People dance. Employees and CEOs usually don't look at each other like that. I'm just saying, the picture's making the rounds. What picture? Check your email. Someone forwarded it to the Leadership Development Group thread this morning. Meant as a joke, I think, but Ryan opened his laptop with hands that weren't quite steady. Sure enough, buried in the thread about next week's session assignment, someone had forwarded a photo with the subject line, "Spotted in the wild, Monroe looking human. The photo was candid, taken from across the reception hall, probably by someone who didn't even realize what they'd captured. But it showed Ryan and Claire on the dance floor, close enough that the connection was obvious, looking at each other with an intensity that transcended polite social dancing. Claire's expression was open, vulnerable in a way she never was at work. And Ryan looked like a man who'd forgotten to guard himself, who'd let his carefully maintained professional distance collapse entirely. The thread below the photo was mostly jokes, light teasing about seeing the CEO at a social event, speculation about whose wedding it was. But there were undertones too, questions about who Ryan was, how he knew Claire, whether this meant anything beyond two people who happened to be at the same wedding. Jessica had texted again. People are curious, but not malicious. Mostly just surprised to see Monroe looking that relaxed. But Ryan, be careful. Corporate politics get weird when personal stuff intersects with professional hierarchy. Ryan knew she was right. He'd been naive to think a moment like that could stay private, that in a world of constant documentation, nothing would leak into his carefully separated spheres. The worlds had collided after all, despite his best efforts to keep them apart. He closed the laptop and called Marcus. His friend answered on the second ring, sounding happily exhausted. "Hey man, how's married life treating you?" "Expensive and wonderful," Marcus laughed. "Jennifer says hi and wants to know when we can have you and Ethan over for dinner." "That'd be great. But actually, I'm calling about something else." Ryan paused, unsure how to frame this. "Did you happen to see a photo from your wedding floating around? Of me and Claire Monroe dancing?" "Oh, that. Yeah, I saw it. My aunt posted it in the family group thinking Claire looked beautiful and didn't realize it would spread." Marcus's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "Is it causing problems?" "Potentially. People at work are seeing it, asking questions." Ryan rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of complications he'd tried to avoid. "We danced once, Marcus. Just once. But apparently we looked like more than that." "You did look like more than that." Marcus's bluntness was both familiar and unwelcome. "Look, I've known you for over a decade. I've never seen you look at anyone the way you looked at Claire in that photo. Not even your ex-wife." "That's not helpful." "It's honest. Ryan, what's actually going on between you two?" Ryan found himself explaining it all. The wedding conversation, Claire's confession that she'd noticed him months ago, their agreement to maintain professional boundaries, the leadership program, Dr. Chen's challenge about sustainable living versus mere survival. Marcus listened without interrupting, the kind of patient attention that made him easy to talk to. "So let me get this straight," Marcus said when Ryan finished. "You have a brilliant, beautiful woman who's interested in you, respects your priorities, understands your situation, and you're refusing to even consider the possibility because... Why, exactly?" "Because she's my CEO. Because if it goes wrong, I lose my job. Because Ethan needs stability more than I need romance." "Does he? Or do you just tell yourself that because it's easier than risking connection?" Marcus's question echoed Dr. Chen's almost word for word. "From what you've told me, Ethan seems pretty resilient, pretty adaptable, maybe more adaptable than his father." Ryan wanted to argue but couldn't find the words, because Marcus was right. Ethan had handled divorce, custody changes, a new school, new routines, all of it with a flexibility that Ryan envied. The person struggling with change, with risk, with the possibility of things going wrong. That was Ryan, not his son. "What if I try and it fails?" Ryan's voice was quieter than he intended. "What if I let myself care about her and it falls apart and I have to start over again? I barely survived it the first time." "What if you try and it works?" Marcus countered. "What if you let yourself be happy and it turns out you're actually capable of building something good? You've spent 2 years proving you can survive alone. Maybe it's time to find out if you can thrive with someone." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that. Honeymoon plans, adjusting to cohabitation, the particular chaos of combining two people's book collections. But Marcus's question stayed with Ryan long after they hung up, circling through his mind with persistent weight. What if it works? Ryan had been so focused on managing risk, on preventing failure, that he'd stopped considering the possibility of success. He'd built his entire life around the assumption that trying would lead to disaster, that the safest choice was always to avoid choosing at all. But what if that assumption was wrong? Monday morning brought a message from Claire, sent to the entire leadership development group, but clearly addressing the photo situation. Team, it's come to my attention that a personal photo from a recent social event has been circulating. While I appreciate that my private life occasionally generates curiosity, I want to be clear. My professional decisions are made solely on merit and performance. The leadership program participants were selected based on documented excellence and potential, nothing more. That said, I'm human. I attend social events, have friendships outside work, and occasionally appear in photographs. This doesn't compromise my judgment or create conflicts of interest. Let's keep our focus on the program objectives and trust that everyone in this room, myself included, maintains appropriate professional standards. Best, Claire. It was diplomatic, firm, exactly what the situation required. But Ryan heard the subtext. Trust me to handle this. Trust that I haven't compromised anything. Trust that professional and personal can coexist without destroying either. The question was whether Ryan trusted himself the same way. Thursday's session was tense in ways that had nothing to do with the actual content. Dr. Chen returned to facilitate a discussion on ethical leadership and managing competing interests, a topic that felt painfully relevant given the previous week's photo circulation. People participated normally, seemingly unfazed by the minor scandal, but Ryan caught sidelong glances, the particular attention that came when people were actively not staring. Claire maintained her usual professionalism, directing conversation without dominating it, challenging assumptions without making anyone defensive. She didn't single Ryan out, didn't give him any special attention, treated him exactly like every other participant, which somehow felt worse than if she'd acknowledged the complication directly. The session ended at 8:40 as usual. People gathered their things, some lingering to talk to Dr. Chen, others heading out with the relieved energy of obligations completed. Ryan was sliding his laptop into his bag when Claire appeared beside him. Can we talk? Privately? Ryan nodded, following her to her office on the 43rd floor. He'd never been in Claire's office before, had deliberately avoided it, actually, and was struck by how different it was from what he expected. Minimal but warm, with art that suggested actual personal taste rather than corporate blandness, a window view that must be stunning during daylight hours, photos on the credenza that showed Claire with people who were clearly family or close friends. She closed the door, which felt both necessary and dangerous. I'm sorry about the photo, Claire said without preamble. I should have anticipated that attending a social event together might create complications. You're sorry for dancing with me at your friend's wedding? Ryan couldn't keep the edge from his voice. That seems like an overcorrection. I'm sorry that a private moment became public in a way that's affecting you professionally. Claire's tone was careful, controlled. The email I sent this morning was meant to shut down speculation, but I know corporate gossip doesn't disappear just because a CEO says it should. People are curious. They'll move on when something more interesting happens. Ryan set his bag down, suddenly tired of carrying it. But Claire, this is exactly what I was worried about. The moment our personal connection becomes visible, it creates complications. Questions about favoritism, about judgment, about whether you're making decisions based on merit or other factors. I know. Claire's composure cracked slightly, showing the frustration beneath. But Ryan, I can't pretend I don't know you outside of work. I can't unsee what I saw at that wedding, can't unfeel what I felt. And I don't want to. What are you saying? I'm saying that maintaining these boundaries is becoming impossible, not because I can't be professional, I can, and I will, but because every time I see you, every time we interact, I'm aware of what we're both pretending doesn't exist. Claire moved closer, her voice dropping. I'm tired of pretending. Aren't you? Ryan felt his carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. Of course I'm tired, but being tired doesn't change the facts. You're my CEO. I'm your employee. Those aren't roles we can just ignore because the situation is inconvenient. So we changed the reporting structure. Claire delivered it like a solution to a business problem, direct and practical. You move to a different department, report to someone else. The program continues with external facilitation instead of my direct involvement. We create appropriate separation while acknowledging that this, she gestured between them, is real and worth exploring. And when it fails, when people realize we're together and decide that every promotion I've ever gotten must have been influenced by personal connection, Ryan's voice was rising, emotion breaking through control. When it falls apart and I'm left trying to rebuild my career while explaining to my 6-year-old why Dad's personal choices affected his stability? Why are you so certain it will fail? Claire's question was almost a challenge. You talk about risk like failure is inevitable, like trying is the same as disaster. But Ryan, you've already survived the worst. Your marriage ended. You built a life from nothing. You're raising an incredible kid on your own. What makes you think you're incapable of building something that works? Because I chose wrong before. Because I married someone who couldn't handle actual partnership, who left when things got hard, who proved that my judgment about people is fundamentally flawed. The words came out raw, honest. What if I'm wrong about you too? What if I let myself care and it turns out you're not who I think you are? Claire's expression softened, the executive polish falling away to reveal something more vulnerable. You're not wrong about me, Ryan. I'm exactly who you think I am. Someone who works too hard, cares too much, takes everything too seriously. Someone who spent years building a career and forgetting to build a life. Someone who saw you at that wedding and realized what I've been missing. Which is what? Connection. Real connection with someone who doesn't need me to be CEO every moment, who sees me as human first and professional second. Claire's voice wavered slightly. I've dated other executives, other people who understand the demands of leadership, but they always wanted the polished version, the successful version. You saw me struggling at a wedding reception and looked at me like I was enough exactly as I was. Ryan remembered that moment, the dance, the way Claire had seemed simultaneously powerful and fragile. How her guard had dropped for just a few moments, revealing the person beneath the authority. You were enough, he said quietly. You are enough. So are you. Claire closed the remaining distance between them. With all your caution and compartmentalization and fear of failure, you're enough. You're more than enough. They stood inches apart, the desk lamp casting shadows across Claire's face, the city lights visible through the window behind her. Ryan could feel his resistance weakening, the walls he'd built to protect himself developing cracks he couldn't repair. I'm scared, he admitted. I'm terrified of screwing this up, of hurting Ethan, of losing everything I've built. I'm scared too. Claire's honesty matched his. I'm scared of compromising my professional judgment, of creating conflicts I can't manage, of failing at something personal when I've spent my whole life succeeding at professional challenges. But I'm more scared of never trying, of looking back in 10 years and wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to risk it. Ryan thought about Dr. Chen's question, about Marcus's challenge, about Ethan asking if he was okay because he seemed different lately. He thought about 2 years of careful management, of choosing safety over everything else, of building a life that functioned but didn't feel alive. And he thought about what it might mean to choose differently. If we do this, and I'm not saying we should, but if we do it carefully. Ryan heard himself negotiating, trying to maintain some control over a situation that felt like it was spiraling beyond his management. Reporting structure changes first. Professional boundaries maintained, slow progression, nothing that disrupts Ethan's stability. Agreed. Claire's response was immediate. Careful, deliberate, with appropriate boundaries. I'm not asking you to risk everything, Ryan. I'm asking you to risk something. That's still terrifying. I know. Claire reached out slowly, giving Ryan time to step back if he wanted. When he didn't, she took his hand, the same gesture that had started everything at the wedding. But maybe we can be terrified together. Ryan looked down at their joined hands, at the simple connection that felt like both the smallest and largest thing in the world. He should pull away, should maintain distance, should protect himself and Ethan from the possibility of disruption. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently. Okay. The word came out barely audible. Okay, we try. Carefully. Claire's smile was radiant, transforming her face from professional composure to genuine joy. Carefully, I promise. They stood like that for a long moment, hands linked, possibilities opening that Ryan had worked hard to keep closed. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and uncertain, knowing that stepping forward meant abandoning the safety of solid ground. But it also felt like coming home to a part of himself he'd locked away, allowing connection where he'd only permitted isolation. "I should go." Ryan said it reluctantly, aware that Mrs. Patterson would be waiting, that Ethan might still be awake. "It's late." "I know." Claire released his hand slowly. "Same time next Thursday? For the session?" "Actually, I think you were right about external facilitation. Dr. Chen should run the rest of the program." Ryan picked up his bag, already thinking through the logistics of separation. "You focus on the organizational restructure. I'll focus on maintaining professional credibility. We keep work and personal as separate as possible while figuring out what this is." "Smart." Well, Claire's approval was genuine. "See why I selected you for the program? Because I'm cautious to the point of being ridiculous? Because you think strategically even when you're being emotionally vulnerable. That's rare." Claire walked him to the office door. "For what it's worth, Ryan, I think we can make this work. Not because it's easy, but because we're both committed to doing it right." Ryan wanted to believe her. Part of him did believe her, but the larger part, the part that had been managing risk for 2 years, remained uncertain. He drove home through late-night traffic, his mind spinning through implications and logistics and all the ways this could go wrong. But underneath the anxiety was something else, a cautious hope, a tentative belief that maybe Marcus was right, maybe Dr. Chen was right, maybe choosing safety wasn't always the same as choosing correctly. Mrs. Patterson reported that Ethan had been wonderful, was already asleep, had asked when Dad was coming home about a dozen times. Ryan paid her, waited until she left, then stood in his son's doorway watching the steady breathing that marked peaceful sleep. "I'm trying something new, buddy," Ryan whispered to his sleeping child. "Something scary, but maybe something good. I promise I won't let it hurt you." Ethan didn't answer, lost in whatever 6-year-olds dreamed about. Ryan stood there a while longer, making promises to himself about careful progression and appropriate boundaries and maintaining stability above all else. But he was also making a different promise: to try, to risk, to believe that he was capable of building something good instead of just managing survival. It was the smallest shift, barely perceptible, but it felt like the beginning of something that might, possibly, be worth the fear. The next week moved with strange momentum. Claire initiated the organizational restructure, moving Ryan to a different department under a different director, while keeping him on high-visibility projects that would justify continued advancement. The leadership program transitioned to Dr. Chen's full facilitation, with Claire attending only as an observer rather than active participant. On paper, it was clean, professional. Exactly the kind of appropriate boundary setting that should eliminate concerns about favoritism or conflicts of interest. In practice, it felt like walking a tightrope while pretending the ground wasn't 40 feet below. Ryan and Claire saw each other in meetings, in hallways, in the elevator occasionally. They maintained professional distance, spoke only about work-related topics when others were present, gave no indication that anything had changed between them. Ryan was good at this. He'd been compartmentalizing his life for years, but now he was doing it in reverse, keeping professional separate while trying to figure out what personal even meant. They texted occasionally. Brief messages, never during work hours, always carefully worded in case anyone ever saw them. Claire asking how Ethan's soccer was going. Ryan asking how her theater subscription was working out. Small windows into each other's lives that felt both intimate and frustratingly limited. 2 weeks after their conversation in Claire's office, they had their first actual date. Dinner at a restaurant 40 minutes outside the city, far enough that running into colleagues was unlikely, quiet enough that they could actually talk. Ryan had agonized over childcare. Asking Mrs. Patterson felt like announcing something significant, but he didn't have other options, and finally settled on honesty. He was going to dinner with someone from work. Mrs. Patterson had smiled knowingly and said she'd be happy to watch Ethan. The restaurant was exactly what they needed: intimate without being romantic, upscale without being pretentious, with corner booths that offered privacy. Claire arrived first, which Ryan appreciated because it meant he could see her in civilian clothes again, dressed for herself rather than corporate expectations. She looked beautiful and slightly nervous, which made Ryan feel less alone in his anxiety. "Hi." Claire's greeting was simple, but her smile was warm. "Hi." Ryan slid into the booth across from her, suddenly aware that this was real, happening, not just a theoretical possibility they'd discussed. "You look great." "So do you. I like the not suit look." Claire gestured to Ryan's casual button-down and jeans, the most dressed down she'd ever seen him. "We should do a rule for tonight. No work talk, just us, as humans, learning about each other without corporate context." "Deal." Ryan felt himself relaxing slightly. "Though I should warn you, my life outside work is mostly 6-year-old logistics and soccer schedules." "I want to hear about that. The real stuff, not the sanitized version." Claire's sincerity was obvious. "Tell me about Ethan. What's he like beyond the facts I already know?" So Ryan did. He talked about Ethan's unexpected sense of humor, his tendency to befriend anyone regardless of social hierarchies, his questions about everything that sometimes exhausted Ryan but also delighted him. He described the morning routines and bedtime negotiations, the way Ethan could be simultaneously mature and completely six, how single parenting had taught Ryan to appreciate small victories. Claire listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed she was actually interested, not just being polite. And when she talked about her own life, about growing up with parents who expected excellence, about choosing business over law because she liked building things more than arguing about them, about the loneliness of leadership positions that required constant performance, Ryan heard echoes of his own experience with different details. They were both people who'd learned to manage carefully, to present polished versions while protecting vulnerable cores. The difference was that Claire had chosen isolation through success, while Ryan had chosen it through caution. But the result was the same. Lives that functioned but didn't feel full. "Can I ask you something?" Claire's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "What happened with your ex-wife? You don't have to answer if it's too personal." Ryan considered deflecting, then remembered their agreement about honesty. "We married young, probably too young. She wanted the idea of family more than the reality. When Ethan was born, and it turned out parenting was actual work, exhausting, relentless, not particularly glamorous work, she checked out emotionally. Stayed physically for a few years, but she wasn't present. When she finally left, it was almost a relief because at least then I could stop pretending we were partners." That must have been devastating. It was, but also clarifying. I learned I was capable of more than I thought, capable of handling everything alone, capable of being enough for Ethan even when I felt inadequate. Ryan paused, but I also learned to stop trusting my judgment about relationships. If I could be that wrong about someone I married, how could I trust myself to choose better next time? "You're not choosing alone this time." Claire's voice was gentle. "I'm choosing too. And I see you clearly, Ryan. Not the polished version or the perfect parent or the careful professional. I see the person underneath who's terrified of failing but showing up anyway. That's who I'm interested in." The conversation flowed through dinner and dessert and coffee after, ranging from heavy topics to light observations about everything from city politics to favorite books. Ryan found himself laughing more than he had in months, found himself interested in Claire's stories about disastrous board meetings and well-meaning but misguided corporate initiatives. She was funny when she wasn't performing authority, self-deprecating about her own mistakes, genuinely curious about perspectives different from her own. By the time they left the restaurant at 10:30, Ryan felt like he'd known Claire for years rather than months. Not the CEO version, but the actual person, complex, imperfect, trying to build something meaningful in a life that had been all structure and no soul. They walked to their cars, parked side by side in the restaurant lot, and Ryan felt the weight of what happened next. Kiss her? Shake hands like this was a business meeting? Acknowledge the strangeness of dating his former boss while trying to maintain professional separation? Claire solved the problem by taking his hand, the gesture that was becoming their signature connection. "I had a really good time tonight." "Me too." Ryan squeezed her hand gently. "Better than I expected, honestly." "What did you expect? Awkward conversation, forced small talk, maybe realizing we have nothing in common outside work?" Ryan smiled. Instead, it felt easy, natural. It did. Claire stepped closer, close enough that Ryan could smell her perfume again, close enough that if he wanted to kiss her, he could. Can we do this again? Soon? Yeah. But we go slow, right? Careful? Careful. Claire's eyes searched his face. Though I should tell you, I'm not particularly patient once I've decided I want something. And I've decided I want this. Want you. Want to see if we can build something real. Ryan's heart was doing complicated things in his chest. I want that too, but I need to manage Ethan's expectations, need to make sure he's okay with me dating before I introduce anyone into his life. Of course. I wouldn't want you to do anything that made him uncomfortable. Claire's understanding was immediate and genuine. This moves at whatever pace works for both of you. No pressure, no timeline. Ryan leaned in slowly, giving Claire time to step back if she wanted. She didn't. Their kiss was soft, tentative, the kind of first kiss that asked questions rather than made demands. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Okay, Ryan said quietly. This is happening. This is happening. Claire's joy was obvious. Carefully. Very carefully. They stood in the parking lot a while longer, reluctant to let the evening end before finally separating to their respective cars and lives. Ryan drove home with the radio off, his mind full of possibilities that still scared him but no longer seemed impossible. Mrs. Patterson reported that Ethan had been perfect, asked twice about when Dad was coming home, and was sleeping soundly. Ryan paid her generously, waited until she left, then did what he'd been doing every night, checked on his son, made sure he was safe and warm and undisturbed by whatever complications his father was creating. But tonight felt different. Tonight Ryan wasn't just managing, he was building, taking a risk on something that might fail but might also work, modeling for his son what it looked like to be brave enough to try again even after failing before. He thought about texting Claire to say he'd made it home safely, decided against it because they were maintaining boundaries, then did it anyway because some boundaries were worth flexing. The response came immediately. Sleep well, Ryan. Tonight was wonderful. Ryan smiled at his phone like a teenager, feeling ridiculous and happy and terrified all at once. This was only the beginning. There would be complications ahead, workplace dynamics to navigate, Ethan's reactions to manage, the constant negotiation between professional and personal that would define whatever they were building. But for the first time in 2 years, Ryan believed he might be capable of more than just survival. He might actually be capable of thriving. And that possibility, fragile and uncertain as it was, felt worth every risk he'd been too afraid to take. The complications arrived faster than Ryan anticipated. It started small, the way these things always did. A colleague from his old department asking why he'd transferred so suddenly. Jessica mentioning over coffee that people were speculating about the organizational restructure, wondering if Ryan's move was voluntary or strategic. Nothing overt, nothing malicious, just the natural curiosity that filled corporate environments when patterns shifted without clear explanation. Ryan handled it with the same careful neutrality he'd cultivated for years. The transfer was a growth opportunity. Different challenges, new leadership, chance to expand his skill set. All technically true, if incomplete. People seemed to accept it, moving on to other topics, other gossip. But the questions left residue, a low-level anxiety that Ryan carried through his days. He was hyper-aware of every interaction with Claire, every email that might be misconstrued, every moment they happened to be in the same meeting or hallway. They maintained perfect professionalism. Too perfect, maybe, their careful distance potentially more noticeable than casual friendliness would have been. Their second date happened 3 weeks after the first, delayed by Ryan's travel for a client presentation and Claire's board meeting preparation. They met at a small art gallery opening, Claire's suggestion, something public enough to be defensible if spotted but specialized enough that running into Meridian colleagues was unlikely. Ryan felt out of his element among the abstract paintings and wine-sipping art enthusiasts, but Claire moved through the space with comfortable ease, occasionally explaining pieces in ways that made them accessible rather than pretentious. "You know a lot about art," Ryan observed as they stood before a canvas that looked like organized chaos, but apparently represented something meaningful about urban isolation. "My mother was a painter, not professionally, just for herself, but she taught me to see beyond surface." Claire's voice carried affection and sadness. She died 5 years ago. Cancer. I keep meaning to do something with her work, but I can't quite bring myself to sort through it yet. Ryan heard the grief beneath the casual mention, recognized the particular weight of loss that didn't fade so much as become familiar. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating. It was. Still is sometimes. Claire turned from the painting to look at Ryan directly. She would have liked you, I think. She had good instincts about people, could always tell who was genuine versus who was performing. And I'm genuine? Painfully so. It's one of the things Claire stopped herself, glancing around the gallery where other attendees mingled nearby. One of the things I appreciate about you. Ryan caught the word she'd almost used, the one that would have shifted this from dating to something more significant. Part of him wanted to hear it, wanted confirmation that what he was feeling wasn't one-sided. But another part, the careful part, the protective part, was grateful she'd held back. They needed more time, more certainty, before declarations that couldn't be easily retracted. They stayed at the gallery until it closed, then walked through the neighborhood discussing everything from the art they'd seen to Ethan's latest soccer triumph to Claire's frustration with a board member who couldn't distinguish between strategic vision and micromanagement. Easy conversation, the kind that came naturally when two people genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "Can I ask you something potentially awkward?" Claire said as they reached her car. "When are you planning to tell Ethan about us? Or is it too soon for that conversation?" Ryan had been dreading this question, not because he didn't have an answer, but because his answer revealed how uncertain he still was about everything. "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should wait until we're sure this is serious, that introducing you too early creates instability if things don't work out. But part of me also feels like I'm lying by omission, like keeping this separate is dishonest." "There's no right answer," Claire said gently. "Just whatever feels appropriate for Ethan's well-being." "I know, I keep thinking about what happens if he gets attached and then we don't work out. He's already dealt with his mother leaving. I don't want to add another loss to his experience of relationships." Claire was quiet for a moment, processing that. "I understand the caution. But Ryan, you can't protect him from every potential disappointment. At some point, you have to trust that he's resilient enough to handle life not being perfect." That sounds like something Dr. Chen would say. Probably because it's true. Claire smiled slightly. "Look, I'm not pushing for introduction if you're not ready, but I also don't want to be your secret indefinitely. That feels less like protecting Ethan and more like protecting yourself from commitment." The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Ryan wanted to argue, to defend his caution as appropriate parenting rather than fear. But Claire was right. He was protecting himself as much as Ethan, using his son's well-being as justification for keeping emotional distance. "You're probably right," Ryan admitted. "I'll think about it, figure out the right timing. That's all I'm asking." Claire reached out to squeeze his hand briefly before stepping back, maintaining the physical distance their situation required. "For what it's worth, I think I'd be terrified to meet him too. 6-year-olds are excellent at seeing through adult pretense." "He is particularly good at that." Ryan smiled despite his anxiety. "Fair warning, if I do introduce you, he'll ask approximately 700 questions and evaluate whether you're acceptable based on criteria I don't fully understand." "I look forward to the interrogation." They said goodnight with another brief kiss, still careful, still tentative, both aware that what they were building required patience neither of them naturally possessed. Ryan drove home thinking about timing and introductions and whether he'd ever feel ready for the next step. The decision was made for him 2 days later when Ethan asked a direct question Ryan couldn't deflect. "Dad, are you dating someone?" They were at breakfast, the usual morning routine of cereal and conversation, when Ethan dropped it casually between bites. Ryan nearly choked on his coffee. "What makes you ask that?" "You've been going out at night sometimes. Mrs. Patterson said you seem happier, and you keep looking at your phone and smiling." Ethan delivered this analysis with the matter-of-fact tone he used for observable facts. "So are you?" Ryan set down his coffee, recognizing that his son deserved honesty more than deflection. "Yeah, buddy, I am. Is that okay with you?" Ethan considered this seriously, the way he considered most important information. "Is it the lady from the wedding, your boss?" The perceptiveness shouldn't have surprised Ryan anymore. She's not my boss anymore. I transferred to a different department. But yes, it's Claire. From the wedding. Do you like her? I do. Very much. Ryan watched his son's face for reaction, trying to gauge whether this news was welcome or concerning. But you're the most important person in my life, Ethan. If you're not comfortable with me dating, we can talk about that. Why wouldn't I be comfortable? Ethan looked genuinely confused. You should have friends and dates. That's what grown-ups do. The simplicity of it nearly broke Ryan's heart. All his anxiety, all his careful calculation about timing and introduction and managing Ethan's expectations, and his 6-year-old saw it as completely natural that Dad might want companionship. You're right, Ryan managed. That is what grown-ups do. I just wanted to make sure you were okay with it, because it means sometimes I'll be gone in the evenings, and it might eventually mean Claire spending time with us. Like coming to my soccer games? Ethan's interest was immediate and practical. Maybe, if you wanted that. Ryan hadn't considered soccer games, hadn't thought that far ahead. Would you want to meet her? Ethan shrugged with 6-year-old nonchalance. Sure, if she's important to you, I should meet her. That's polite. And just like that, the decision Ryan had been agonizing over for weeks was made by his first grader's sense of social courtesy. Sometimes children cut through complexity with a clarity adults had lost somewhere along the way. Okay then, I'll talk to Claire about when might be a good time. Ryan felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. Any questions about this? Just one. Ethan's expression became more serious. Is she nice to you? Like, really nice, not just pretend nice? The question revealed more wisdom than Ryan had given his son credit for. Ethan had watched his parents' marriage deteriorate, had learned to distinguish between performed harmony and genuine connection. He was asking if Claire was real, if this relationship had substance beyond surface pleasantness. She's really nice, Ryan said honestly. She listens when I talk, she asks about you. She makes me laugh, and she's patient with me when I'm being too careful about things. Good. Ethan returned to his cereal, apparently satisfied. Can I tell Tommy at school? His parents are dating too after his dad's divorce, so he'll probably have advice. Ryan smiled despite himself. Sure, you can tell Tommy. They finished breakfast and executed the morning routine with its usual precision, but something had shifted. Ryan had been so focused on protecting Ethan from potential disruption that he'd underestimated his son's capacity for acceptance. Ethan wasn't fragile. He was adaptable, resilient, capable of handling his father having a relationship without it threatening their bond. The person who needed convincing wasn't Ethan. It was Ryan. He texted Claire during his commute, breaking his usual rule about morning communication. Ethan knows about us. Asked directly. He wants to meet you. The response came quickly. How did he react? Better than I did. Apparently I'm the only one making this complicated. You're protecting what matters most. That's not complicated, that's love. Ryan stared at the word on his screen, feeling its weight. Love. Was that what this was? He cared about Claire, enjoyed her company, felt something shift inside him when they were together. But love felt like a commitment he wasn't ready to make, a declaration that couldn't be walked back if circumstances changed. Though maybe that was exactly why Claire had used it, to remind him that real connection required risk, that safety and significance couldn't always coexist. The morning at work was consumed by a client crisis that required Ryan's full attention, which was almost a relief. Focusing on data analysis and strategic recommendations was easier than processing the emotional complexity of introducing his girlfriend. Was that what Claire was? They hadn't defined it. To his son. He was reviewing presentation slides when Jessica appeared at his new cubicle with her characteristic directness. So, Claire Monroe, she didn't bother with preamble. You're dating her. Ryan's stomach dropped. What makes you think that? Because I'm observant and you're both terrible at hiding it. Jessica sat on the edge of his desk, lowering her voice. The careful distance, the way you don't look at each other in meetings, the organizational restructure that makes no sense unless you're creating appropriate separation. Ryan, I'm not judging, I'm concerned. About what? About whether you've thought through the implications. Corporate politics are brutal, especially around executive relationships. If this goes wrong, you're the one who'll pay the price, not Claire. Jessica's tone was worried, not accusatory. I like you. I don't want to see you get hurt professionally because you fell for the CEO. She's not the CEO anymore. To me, I mean. Different reporting structure, clear boundaries. Ryan heard how defensive he sounded. We're being careful. I know you think you are, but careful doesn't always protect you from gossip. People are already speculating. Jessica paused, then added more gently, Look, if this is real, if you genuinely care about each other, then I hope it works out. But protect yourself, okay? Document everything. Keep professional interactions transparent. Don't give anyone ammunition to claim favoritism. She left before Ryan could respond, her warning sitting heavy in his chest. He'd been so focused on managing Ethan's reaction that he'd underestimated the ongoing professional risk. Jessica was right. If this relationship became visible, if people connected the dots between the wedding photo and the department transfer and whatever else they'd noticed, Ryan would be the one facing questions. Claire had the authority of her position. Ryan had vulnerability. He pushed the anxiety aside, refocusing on work that needed completion. But the conversation stayed with him through the afternoon, through the evening pickup of Ethan from aftercare, through dinner and homework and the familiar routines that constituted their life. By the time Ethan was asleep, Ryan had made a decision. He called Claire, something they rarely did. Texts were safer, less intimate, easier to explain if questioned. She answered on the second ring. Ryan? Everything okay? Yeah, no, I don't know. Ryan sat in his dark living room, staring at nothing. I talked to Ethan this morning. He knows about us, wants to meet you. And a colleague confronted me today about our relationship, warned me about professional implications. And I'm sitting here realizing I have no idea what I'm doing or whether this is sustainable. Claire was quiet for a moment. Do you want to stop? Is that what you're saying? No, maybe. I don't know. Ryan rubbed his eyes, exhausted by his own uncertainty. I want this to work, Claire. I do. But I'm scared that wanting isn't enough, that we're building something beautiful that's going to collapse under the weight of reality. Reality is already here, Ryan. We're navigating it. Not perfectly, but we're trying. Claire's voice was steady, calm. What specifically are you afraid of right now? That I'll lose my job. That people will think I advanced because of you rather than merit. That Ethan will meet you and get attached, and then if we don't work out, he'll have another loss to process. That I'm being selfish by pursuing this when the safe choice would be to walk away. So, the words tumbled out, fear-given voice. I'm afraid I'm making the same mistakes I made before, choosing what I want over what's wise. Your ex-wife wasn't a mistake. She was a choice that didn't work out. That's different. Claire's response was gentle but firm. And Ryan, you're not being selfish. You're being human. You're allowed to want connection, to build a relationship, to take chances on happiness. That doesn't make you a bad father or a bad person. It might make me a bad employee if this blows up professionally. Then we make sure it doesn't blow up. We maintain boundaries, document everything, prove through actions that our professional lives are separate from personal. Claire paused. But I need to know, are you in this? Actually in this, willing to work through complications? Or are you looking for an exit strategy? The question was fair, direct, exactly what the situation required. Ryan thought about the past months, about dancing at a wedding and feeling something shift, about dinner conversations that felt like coming home, about the way Claire looked at him like he was enough exactly as he was. He thought about Ethan's simple acceptance, about Dr. Chen's challenge to stop just surviving, about Marcus asking what if it works. I'm in, he said quietly. Terrified, but in. I want to try. Then we try. Together. One careful step at a time. Claire's relief was audible. And regarding Ethan, how about next Saturday? Something low pressure. Maybe the three of us get lunch after his soccer game. I can meet him in a context he's comfortable with. You can manage the introduction. We take it from there. Ryan's chest tightened with anxiety and hope mixed together. That could work. He'd like that you're coming to his game. Then it's settled. Send me the details. I'll be there. Claire's warmth came through clearly. Ryan, I know this is scary, but I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure it out. They talked for a few more minutes before ending the call, Ryan feeling marginally more settled. The complications hadn't disappeared. Professional risk, personal vulnerability, the constant negotiation between what he wanted and what felt safe. But Claire was right. They were in this together, navigating difficulties rather than avoiding them. The week leading up to Saturday moved with strange momentum. Ryan worked, parented, attended the final leadership development session where Dr. Chen praised the group's growth and challenged them to apply their learning in real contexts. Claire was there as an observer, contributing occasionally but letting Dr. Chen lead. They didn't speak privately, maintaining the professional distance that had become their default setting. But Ryan caught her looking at him once during a discussion about authentic leadership, her expression soft with something that looked like pride or affection or maybe both. He looked away quickly, aware that others might notice, but carried that look with him through the rest of the session. Saturday morning arrived with Ethan's usual game day excitement, amplified by the knowledge that Claire would be attending. He'd asked approximately 36 questions during the week about what she was like, whether she knew anything about soccer, if she would sit with them or separately. Ryan had answered as best he could, trying to project calm confidence while internally panicking about every possible way the introduction could go wrong. The game started at 10. Ryan and Ethan arrived at 9:45, joining the cluster of parents setting up folding chairs along the sideline. Marcus, Tommy's dad, waved them over, making space in the unofficial parent section. "Big day," Marcus observed quietly while the kids warmed up. Tommy mentioned Ethan's excited about someone special coming to watch. "Yeah, my girlfriend is coming." The word felt strange in Ryan's mouth, too casual for what Claire was, but too formal for what they'd shared. First time meeting Ethan officially. That's a big step. How are you feeling about it? Terrified? Hopeful? All the contradictory emotions at once. Ryan scanned the parking lot looking for Claire's car. What if he doesn't like her? What if she realizes that dating a single dad is more complicated than she thought? Then you deal with it. But Ryan, you're catastrophizing. Most likely scenario is that it goes fine, not perfect, not disaster, just fine, and you all figure it out together. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. Breathe. You've handled harder things than introducing your kid to your girlfriend. Ryan wanted to believe that. Was trying to believe it when Claire appeared at 10:05, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that made her look younger and less intimidating than her usual professional attire. She spotted Ryan and headed over, her smile warm but showing nerves Ryan found oddly reassuring. Hi. Claire's greeting was simple, but her eyes asked the question, how do we do this? Hi. Thanks for coming. Ryan gestured toward the field where Ethan was practicing with his team, not yet aware of Claire's arrival. He's number 7, the one who just completely missed that pass. Claire laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. He looks like he's having fun. He is. That's what matters. Ryan took a breath, then called out, Ethan, come here for a second. His son jogged over, slightly sweaty already, looking between Ryan and Claire with open curiosity. Ryan made the introduction with a casual confidence he didn't entirely feel. Ethan, this is Claire. Claire, my son Ethan. Hi, Ethan. Claire extended her hand formally, treating him with the same serious respect she'd given an adult. Your dad's told me a lot about you. I'm glad to finally meet you. Ethan shook her hand solemnly, then launched immediately into interrogation mode. Do you like soccer? I don't know much about it, honestly, but I'm excited to learn. Claire's admission was refreshingly honest. Your dad says you're really good. I'm okay. Tommy's better. Ethan glanced back at the field where his team was being called for final instructions. I have to go, but you're staying for the whole game, right? Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it. Cool. Ethan grinned, apparently satisfied with this initial assessment, and jogged back to join his team. Claire turned to Ryan, relief evident in her expression. Well, that wasn't so bad. First test passed, approximately 17 more to go. Ryan gestured to the empty chair beside him. Come on, let me introduce you to the other parents before the game starts. The next hour passed in a blur of soccer action Ryan barely tracked. He was too aware of Claire beside him, watching Ethan play with genuine interest, asking questions about positions and rules that showed she was actually paying attention. The other parents welcomed her easily, assuming she was Ryan's girlfriend without needing explicit confirmation, making small talk that was friendly without being invasive. It felt normal. Surprisingly, impossibly normal. Claire cheering when Ethan's team scored, commiserating when they missed opportunities, fitting into this slice of Ryan's life without effort or pretense. He'd worried that her presence would feel disruptive, would highlight how separate his worlds had been. Instead, it felt like pieces clicking together, connections forming that made the whole stronger than its parts. When the game ended, Ethan's team winning 3-2, they waited while he collected his things and said goodbye to teammates. Claire had suggested lunch at a family-friendly restaurant nearby, somewhere Ethan could be himself without pressure to perform adult social graces. "So," Ethan said as they walked to the parking lot, "are we all riding together or separate?" Ryan glanced at Claire, recognizing the implicit question. Together meant declaring something, meant presenting as a unit rather than two adults who happened to be sharing a meal with a child. "Together," Claire said before Ryan could answer. "If that's okay with everyone?" Ethan shrugged with his usual nonchalance. "Okay. Can I sit in the front?" "Back seat, buddy. Safety rules don't change just because we have company." Ryan unlocked his car, watching Claire fold herself into the passenger seat with the particular care tall people brought to compact vehicles. "Sorry, it's not the most luxurious ride. It's perfect. Lived in. Authentic." Claire smiled at him with warmth that made Ryan's chest feel tight. "Unlike my car, which is basically a status symbol on wheels." Lunch was easier than Ryan had dared hope. They found a booth at a pizza place Ethan loved, ordered food he would actually eat, and settled into conversation that flowed naturally despite the potential awkwardness of the situation. Claire asked Ethan about school, about his favorite subjects, about friends and interests beyond soccer. She listened to his answers with genuine attention, asked follow-up questions that showed she was actually interested in his responses rather than just making polite conversation. And Ethan, for his part, seemed to like her. He opened up in the way he did with adults who treated him seriously, sharing stories about classroom dynamics and playground politics that made Claire laugh. When the pizza arrived, they ate and talked and felt for all the world like something approximating a family. Ryan watched them interact with cautious hope growing in his chest. This could work. Against all his catastrophic predictions, this could actually work. "Dad says you're really smart," Ethan announced between bites of pizza, delivering the observation with his characteristic directness. "Is that true?" Claire smiled. "I'm good at some things, not so good at others." "What about you? What are you really good at?" "Reading and making friends and asking questions that make adults uncomfortable." Ethan delivered this self-assessment seriously. "Dad says I should work on the last one." "I think asking questions is important. How else do you learn?" Claire glanced at Ryan with amusement. "Though maybe choosing the right time and place for uncomfortable questions is a skill worth developing." "That's what Dad says too." Ethan considered this, then asked the question Ryan had been dreading. "Are you going to be my dad's girlfriend for a long time? Or just for now?" The directness of it stopped conversation. Claire didn't deflect or offer empty reassurance. She thought about it seriously before answering. "I hope for a long time, but relationships are complicated, and nobody can predict the future with certainty. What I can tell you is that I care about your dad very much, and I care about making sure you're okay with this situation. So if you ever have questions or concerns, you can talk to me directly. Deal?" Ethan processed this with the gravity he brought to important commitments. "Deal. But if you hurt my dad's feelings, I'll be really mad at you." "That's fair." Claire's expression was solemn, matching his tone. "And if I hurt his feelings, he should be mad at me too. People who care about each other don't get a pass on being hurtful." Ryan felt something shift inside him, some final resistance dissolving. Claire wasn't performing for Ethan, wasn't trying to win him over with false promises or manipulative charm. She was being honest, treating a 6-year-old with the same respect she'd give anyone, acknowledging that relationships required care and couldn't be guaranteed. The lunch continued with lighter topics, and by the time they finished, Ethan was chattering about wanting to show Claire his room, his soccer trophies, the drawing he'd made of the solar system that was hanging on the refrigerator. Ryan agreed, feeling like he was watching his carefully separated worlds merge in real time. Back at the house, Ethan gave Claire the full tour with the pride of someone showing off his domain. Claire admired everything with genuine interest, asked questions about his collections and hobbies, listened to explanations about why certain toys were special or certain books were favorites. Ryan followed them through the house, seeing his life through her eyes, modest but comfortable, organized around a child's needs, filled with evidence of single dad functionality rather than interior design aesthetics. If Claire judged any of it, she didn't show it. She simply engaged with Ethan's world on its own terms, treating his interests as worthy of attention. By the time they settled in the living room, Ethan had apparently decided Claire was acceptable. He plopped down on the couch next to her, a level of physical proximity he usually reserved for people he trusted, and started explaining the intricate plot of his favorite cartoon show. Ryan excused himself to make coffee, giving them space while keeping an ear on the conversation. He heard Ethan's enthusiastic explanations and Claire's thoughtful questions, the easy rapport building between them. It was almost too good to be true, which made Ryan nervous. When did the other shoe drop? When did complications emerge to prove that this integration was impossible? He was pouring coffee when Claire appeared in the kitchen, leaving Ethan absorbed in drawing something at the coffee table. "Hey." Her voice was quiet, meant only for Ryan. "He's wonderful. You've done an incredible job with him. He makes it easy, most of the time." Ryan handed her a mug, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "How are you doing? This is a lot. Meeting my son, seeing my actual life beyond work, and carefully orchestrated dates." "I'm doing well. Better than well." Claire leaned against the counter, close enough that they were having a private conversation despite being visible from the living room. "This feels right, Ryan. Being here, meeting Ethan, seeing how you've built this life, it doesn't scare me. It makes me want to be part of it." Ryan felt his throat tighten with emotion he hadn't expected. "Yeah? Yeah?" Claire's smile was soft, certain. "I know we're taking it slow, being careful, all the things we agreed on, but I need you to know I'm serious about this, about you, about figuring out how to build something real that incorporates all the complicated parts of our lives. Even the 6-year-old who asks uncomfortable questions? Especially him. He's part of you, Ryan. I can't care about you without caring about him too." Claire set down her coffee, reaching for Ryan's hand. "I'm in this. Completely." Ryan squeezed her hand, allowing himself to believe it. They stood in his modest kitchen, coffee growing cold, hearing Ethan humming to himself in the next room, and for the first time in years, Ryan felt like his life was expanding rather than just surviving. "I should probably go soon," Claire said reluctantly. "Give you two your evening routine without disruption. Or you could stay for dinner, if you want. Nothing fancy, just whatever I throw together, but..." Ryan trailed off, recognizing the significance of the invitation. Dinner meant integrating Claire further into their daily life, meant normal rather than special occasion, meant treating her presence as welcome rather than temporary. Claire's expression showed she understood the weight of what he was offering. "I'd love that. Let me help cook?" They returned to the living room where Ethan was still drawing, announced the dinner plan, and received his enthusiastic approval. The next few hours passed in domestic simplicity, cooking together while Ethan did homework at the kitchen table, eating dinner with conversation that flowed between adult topics and child interests, cleaning up with the collaborative ease of people comfortable in shared space. By the time Claire left at 8:30, Ethan's bedtime approaching, the day drawing to its natural close, Ryan felt like something fundamental had shifted. They'd crossed a threshold, moved from dating to something more integrated, proved that careful didn't mean impossible. Claire kissed him goodbye at the door, brief but warm, then knelt down to Ethan's level. "Thanks for letting me spend today with you. I had a really good time." "Me too. You should come to my next soccer game." Ethan delivered the invitation with casual certainty. "And maybe you can teach my dad about art since you know a lot about it." "Deal." Claire stood, her eyes bright with emotion Ryan recognized. "See you both soon." After she left, Ryan and Ethan went through their bedtime routine with its familiar rhythms. But when Ryan tucked his son in, Ethan asked the question that mattered most. "Do you love her, Dad?" Ryan paused, considering honesty versus protection, then chose truth. "I think I might. It's still new, still developing, but yeah, I think I might love her." "Good." Ethan yawned, already half asleep. "She's nice, and she makes you smile more." Ryan sat with that observation after Ethan drifted off, thinking about smiling, about joy, about allowing himself to want more than just stability. Claire made him smile, made him feel like life could be something beyond careful management, made him believe that risk might sometimes lead to reward rather than disaster. He texted her from his dark living room. "Thank you for today, for being patient with both of us, for making this feel possible." The response came quickly. "Thank you for letting me in. Today was perfect." Ryan smiled at his phone, feeling ridiculous and happy, and still a little scared, but mostly just grateful. Grateful for Ethan's acceptance, for Claire's patience, for the possibility that he might actually be building something sustainable. The complications hadn't disappeared. Professional dynamics still needed careful navigation. His own fears still surfaced regularly. The future remained uncertain. But for the first time in years, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. And that shift, small but significant, felt like the beginning of something Ryan hadn't dared hope for. Something that looked remarkably like a future worth choosing. The possibility became reality gradually, measured in small integrations rather than dramatic declarations. Claire attended 3 more soccer games over the following month, becoming a familiar presence among the parent crowd. She joined them for Sunday brunch twice, helped Ethan with a science project about plant growth, attended a school art show where his watercolor painting of their neighborhood won second place. Each interaction deepened the connection, proved that what they were building could withstand the ordinary pressures of daily life. At work, Ryan and Claire maintained their careful distance. They communicated through appropriate channels, interacted professionally in meetings, gave no one reason to question the organizational restructure. But the effort of separation was becoming harder, not easier. Ryan would see Claire in the hallway and have to resist the instinct to smile too warmly. She'd contribute to his strategy discussion, and he'd recognize the thinking patterns they'd explored over dinner conversations, the insights she'd shared privately now offered to the broader team. It was Jessica who finally forced the issue, cornering Ryan in the break room during a quiet Friday afternoon. "You need to tell people," she said without preamble. "About you and Claire." Ryan's coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. "What makes you think there's something to tell?" "Because I have eyes and a functioning brain." Jessica's tone was fond rather than accusatory. "And because the longer you keep it quiet, the worse it'll look when it inevitably comes out. Right now, you can control the narrative. Wait until someone else figures it out, and you lose that control. We're being careful. Appropriate boundaries, separate reporting structures, everything documented." Ryan heard the defensiveness in his voice. "There's nothing inappropriate happening." "I didn't say it was inappropriate. I said it was invisible, and invisible creates speculation." Jessica leaned against the counter, her expression serious. "Look, I get why you've been quiet. Corporate relationships are complicated, especially with the power dynamics involved. But Ryan, people are already wondering. The photo from the wedding, the sudden transfer, the way you both very carefully don't look at each other in meetings, it's creating more questions than answers." Ryan set down his coffee, feeling the weight of what she was saying. "So what are you suggesting?" "Be honest. Not a company-wide announcement or anything dramatic, but stop actively hiding. Let people see you're together, answer questions directly if asked. Prove through continued professional excellence that the relationship doesn't compromise either of your judgments." Jessica softened her tone. "You're both good at your jobs. You both have strong track records. That doesn't disappear because you're dating, but the secrecy makes it seem like you think it should." She left before Ryan could respond, her words settling over him with uncomfortable truth. He'd been so focused on protecting himself from professional fallout that he hadn't considered how the protection itself might be creating the problem. Secrecy implied something shameful. Transparency suggested confidence that nothing inappropriate was occurring. He thought about it through the afternoon, through the drive home, through dinner with Ethan, who was excited about an upcoming field trip. By the time his son was asleep, Ryan had made a decision. He called Claire, explaining Jessica's conversation and his own growing certainty that hiding was causing more harm than disclosure. "I think she's right," Claire said after listening to his reasoning. "We've been so careful that we've made the relationship itself seem questionable. But Ryan, if we do this, if we acknowledge it publicly, we need to be prepared for scrutiny. Questions about favoritism, about when it started, about whether professional decisions have been influenced by personal feelings. I know, but we can answer those questions honestly. Ryan felt more certain as he articulated it. The timeline is clear. The organizational restructure created appropriate separation. My performance metrics are documented and strong. We've done everything right. We just haven't been willing to defend it publicly. Okay. Claire's agreement came with audible relief. How do you want to handle it? They strategized like the professionals they were, planning disclosure with the same careful attention they'd bring to any sensitive business matter. Claire would inform HR and her executive team first, framing it as a personal relationship that had developed outside work and been managed with appropriate structural changes. Ryan would be direct if colleagues asked, neither volunteering information unnecessarily nor deflecting direct questions. They'd let the situation normalize through time and continued professional excellence. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't romantic. It was practical and strategic and exactly what their situation required. Monday morning, Claire scheduled meetings with HR and her chief of staff, disclosing the relationship and reviewing the organizational changes that had been implemented to manage potential conflicts. By noon, the information had filtered through the executive team. By mid-afternoon, it was spreading through the broader organization with the speed that characterized all corporate news. Ryan's inbox filled with messages from colleagues. Most were supportive, congratulations, expressions of happiness, a few jokes about office romances that were good-natured rather than malicious. Jessica sent a brief text. Proud of you. This was the right call. But there were also questions, the kind Ryan had anticipated. A senior analyst from finance wanted to understand the timeline, to ensure that Ryan's recent promotion had been merit-based. Someone from HR requested a meeting to discuss company policy on workplace relationships and verify that all appropriate protocols had been followed. The head of Ryan's current department asked for a conversation about managing team dynamics given the disclosure. Ryan handled each inquiry with the same calm directness, providing documentation when requested, explaining the timeline honestly, emphasizing that professional standards had been maintained throughout. It was exhausting, this constant defense of choices that had been made carefully, but it was also clarifying. Each conversation proved that Ryan had nothing to hide. The transparency revealed appropriateness rather than misconduct. By Wednesday, the initial intensity had faded. People had processed the information, satisfied their curiosity, moved on to other topics. The relationship was now simply a known fact about Ryan Walker, like his single parenthood or his skill with data analysis, part of who he was, neither scandalous nor particularly remarkable. Claire texted him Wednesday evening. How are you holding up? Ryan replied from his kitchen while Ethan practiced spelling words at the table. Tired but okay. I think the worst is over. Dinner this weekend? The three of us? I was thinking maybe I could cook at my place, let Ethan see where I live. Ryan paused, recognizing the significance of the invitation. Claire's home was another integration, another step toward building something that encompassed all their lives, rather than just the carefully controlled pieces they'd been sharing. That sounds good. I'll check with Ethan, but I'm sure he'll be excited. Ethan was indeed excited, particularly when Ryan explained that Claire had a piano and had offered to teach him some basic songs. The prospect of learning an instrument trumped any hesitation about visiting a new place. Saturday arrived with autumn weather, crisp and clear, the kind of day that made the city feel manageable. Ryan and Ethan drove to Claire's apartment in a neighborhood Ryan had passed through but never explored, finding street parking and walking the final block to her building. Claire lived on the 14th floor of a renovated building with Art Deco details and a doorman who greeted her by name. Her apartment was everything Ryan expected, elegant but comfortable, filled with books and art that reflected actual taste rather than designer curation. Large windows offering city views that must be spectacular at sunrise. Wow, Ethan breathed, immediately drawn to the windows. You can see everything from up here. Pretty close to everything. Claire smiled, watching him explore with the same careful attention she brought to all interactions with Ryan's son. Want to see the piano? It's in the next room. She led them to a space that functioned as both office and music room, dominated by an upright piano that showed signs of regular use. Claire sat on the bench, gesturing for Ethan to join her, and began teaching him simple melodies with patient encouragement, Ryan watched from the doorway, seeing them together, and felt something settle in his chest. This was real. Not just dates carefully scheduled around childcare, not just managing professional complications, but actual life being built with deliberate care. Claire teaching his son to play piano. Ethan absorbed in learning, trusting her guidance. The three of them existing in shared space without performance or pretense. Later, while Claire was in the kitchen preparing dinner and Ethan was reading on her couch, Ryan joined her, moving to help with vegetables that needed chopping. "He's happy here," Ryan observed quietly. "That's not something I expected so quickly." "He's adaptable." "Like his father," Claire smiled, then grew more serious. "Can I ask you something? How are you really doing with everything? The disclosure at work, the integration of our lives, all the changes?" Ryan considered the question honestly. "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. The work stuff was uncomfortable but manageable. And this," he gestured to encompass the apartment, the evening, the life they were building, "this feels right. Scary sometimes, but right." "Just sometimes scary?" Claire's tone was teasing, but her eyes were serious. "Okay, frequently scary. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for the complications to become unmanageable." Ryan set down the knife, turning to face her fully. "But they haven't, and I'm starting to believe maybe they won't." "Nothing's guaranteed, Ryan. You know that." Claire moved closer, close enough that they were having a private conversation, despite Ethan's presence in the next room. "But we're both committed to making this work, to navigating complications together rather than letting them break us. That matters more than guarantees." Ryan pulled her into a hug, holding on perhaps longer than necessary, feeling the particular comfort that came from being understood. They'd built something here, carefully and deliberately, proving that risk could lead somewhere other than disaster. Dinner was simple but warm, pasta and salad, conversation that flowed easily between adult topics and Ethan's enthusiastic contributions. Afterward, they played a board game that Ethan won through a combination of luck and strategic thinking that made both adults laugh. By 8:30, when Ryan announced it was time to head home for bedtime, Ethan protested with the particular whining that indicated he was genuinely enjoying himself. "We can come back," Claire assured him. "Maybe next weekend we can do this again?" "Can I practice piano more?" Ethan asked hopefully. "Absolutely. We'll make it a regular thing." In the car on the drive home, Ethan was quiet in the way that preceded important observations. Ryan waited, knowing his son would speak when ready. "Dad, I really like Claire." "Yeah? I'm glad, buddy." "Do you think she might stay? Like, not just for now, but for a long time?" Ethan's voice carried the particular vulnerability that came with asking about permanence, about whether adults could be trusted to remain. Ryan chose his words carefully, wanting to be honest without making promises he couldn't guarantee. "I think she wants to stay, and I want her to stay. But relationships are complicated, and we're still figuring things out. What I can promise is that whatever happens, you and I are solid. We're the constant, okay?" "Okay?" Ethan processed this, then added, "But I think she'll stay. She looks at you the way you look at her." Ryan smiled despite the tightness in his throat. "How do we look at each other? Like you're both happy to be in the same room, like the other person makes things better." Ethan delivered this observation with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes accessed. That's how people look when they're going to stay. Ryan hoped his 6-year-old was right. The following weeks proved Ethan's observation increasingly accurate. Claire became a regular presence in their lives. Not living with them, not rushing toward cohabitation, but integrated in ways that felt natural rather than forced. She attended Ethan's school conferences, contributing observations about his learning style that came from genuine attention rather than obligation. She joined their Sunday routines sometimes, blending into the grocery shopping and meal prep and lazy afternoon reading that constituted weekends. She maintained her own life and space while making room for theirs, the balance that suggested sustainability rather than temporary enthusiasm. At work, the relationship settled into accepted fact. People stopped asking questions, stopped speculating, simply incorporated this information into their understanding of who Ryan Walker and Claire Monroe were. Ryan continued to excel in his role, earning a significant promotion in late November based on documented performance and strategic contributions that no one could reasonably attribute to favoritism. Claire continued to lead the company with the same focused excellence that had always characterized her work, proving that personal life and professional capability could coexist without compromise. But it was the small moments that convinced Ryan they were building something sustainable. Claire helping Ethan with math homework while Ryan cooked dinner. Ryan attending a theater performance with Claire, discovering he actually enjoyed the experience when sharing it with someone who could explain what made it meaningful. The three of them decorating a Christmas tree in Ryan's living room, Claire and Ethan debating ornament placement with playful seriousness while Christmas music played in the background. These weren't dramatic moments. They were ordinary, domestic, the kind of scenes that characterized real relationships rather than romantic fantasies. And their ordinariness was exactly what made them significant. It was Christmas Eve when the conversation Ryan had been both anticipating and dreading finally happened. Ethan was asleep upstairs, worn out from the excitement of the day. Claire had stayed for dinner and the evening tradition of reading the same story they'd read every Christmas Eve since Ethan was old enough to understand it. Now they sat in Ryan's living room, lights low, the decorated tree casting shadows across walls that had seen 2 years of single-parent survival and were now witnessing something new. "I've been thinking about next year," Claire said quietly, her hand linked with Ryan's on the couch between them. "About what we want this to look like long-term." Ryan's pulse accelerated slightly, recognizing the weight of this conversation. "What have you been thinking?" "That I'm tired of dividing my life between my place and yours. That I want to wake up with you more often than not. That I want to be part of Ethan's daily routine, not just weekend visits and special occasions." Claire turned to face him more fully. "I'm not suggesting we rush into anything, but Ryan, I want to start talking about what building a life together actually looks like. Logistics, timelines, what works for all three of us." Ryan had known this conversation was coming, had been preparing for it mentally for weeks. But having it become real, having to articulate what he wanted versus what he feared, required courage he wasn't sure he possessed. "I want that too," he said carefully. "But I'm scared of the logistics. Ethan's school is here, his routine is established, his life is stable. Moving feels like disrupting what's working. So maybe I move here, or we find a place that's new to both of us, something we choose together." Claire's response was practical, solution-focused. "I'm not attached to my apartment, Ryan. I'm attached to you and to Ethan. The location is just details. Just details that affect custody agreements and school districts and every structure I've built to keep his life stable." Ryan heard the edge in his voice, the fear manifesting as resistance. "I can't make decisions about his living situation based solely on what I want." "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to consider that stability might look different than what you've been doing." Claire's tone was gentle but firm. "Ethan's stable because you've been a consistent, present parent. That doesn't change if we live together. If anything, it expands his support system, gives him more people who care about his well-being." Ryan wanted to argue, to articulate all the ways cohabitation could go wrong, all the risks they'd be taking, but he was tired of leading with fear, tired of making every decision from a defensive position. "What if we tried it gradually?" he heard himself say. "Start with weekends. See how it feels for Ethan to have you here more consistently. Then maybe we look at places together, find somewhere that works for all of us. Take it in stages rather than one big change." Claire's smile was radiant. "That's perfect. Careful, but forward-moving. Exactly what we need." They talked through the evening, making plans that felt both terrifying and right. Claire would start staying over more frequently, building familiarity with their daily routines. They'd look at neighborhoods that offered good schools and reasonable commutes for both of them. They'd involve Ethan in the process, letting him voice concerns and preferences, proving that his needs remained central to any decisions being made. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a dramatic commitment. It was two people deciding to build something together with the same careful attention they'd brought to everything else. Ryan walked Claire to her car around midnight, the neighborhood quiet under December cold. They stood in his driveway, breath visible in the frigid air, holding on to each other against the chill. "Thank you," Ryan said quietly, "for being patient with my fear, for not giving up when I was too scared to move forward. Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me with something as important as your son." Claire kissed him softly. "We're going to be okay, Ryan. All three of us. Ryan watched her drive away, then returned to his house where Ethan slept peacefully upstairs, trusting that Dad would keep making good choices. And for the first time in years, Ryan believed he actually was making good choices. Not perfect ones, not without risk, but choices that honored both caution and courage. Child. The transition happened gradually through winter and into spring. Claire started staying over on weekends, then occasionally during the week when logistics allowed. Ethan adapted with the flexibility Ryan should have anticipated, treating Claire's presence as natural rather than disruptive. They established new routines, Claire helping with school drop-offs some mornings, joining the homework sessions, contributing to the Sunday meal prep that had been Ryan's solitary domain. In March, they started looking at houses together. Not apartments, Claire had insisted. If they were doing this, they should do it properly. Give Ethan a backyard for soccer practice. Create space for everyone to have privacy when needed. Ryan had been skeptical about affording anything suitable until Claire gently reminded him that she had resources to contribute, that building a life together meant pooling assets rather than insisting on artificial separation. That conversation had required its own navigation. Ryan's pride wanted to provide independently, to prove he could support his family without help. But Claire challenged that thinking, asking whether partnership meant sharing burdens or maintaining ego-driven independence. She was right, as she often was. Partnership required letting go of the narrative that he had to do everything alone. They found a house in late April, modest but spacious, in a good school district, with a backyard that Ethan immediately claimed for soccer goals. The purchase process was complicated by Ryan's need to coordinate with his ex-wife about custody arrangements, a conversation he'd been dreading. Sarah had remarried the previous year, was living several states away, had maintained minimal contact with Ethan beyond required birthday and Christmas gestures. When Ryan called to inform her about the house purchase and potential address change, he'd braced for conflict. Instead, she'd sounded relieved. "Ryan, I'm glad you're moving on. Building something stable for Ethan." Her voice carried the weariness of someone who'd long ago recognized her own limitations. "I know I haven't been present. I'm not proud of that. But I'm glad he has you. And if this Claire person is good to him, then I'm glad he has her too." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was permission, acknowledgement that Ryan's choices were creating the stability Sarah couldn't provide. He'd taken it as the closest thing to blessing he was likely to receive. The move happened in June, coordinated with Ethan's end of school year to minimize disruption. Claire had already been staying over most nights, so the actual consolidation of households was less dramatic than Ryan had anticipated. Her furniture blended with his, her books integrated onto their shelves, her presence in every room feeling like it had always belonged there. Ethan loved the house immediately, particularly the backyard where he could practice soccer without neighbors complaining. He loved having his own room that was bigger than the old one, loved that Claire's piano had moved with them so he could continue lessons, loved the normalcy of coming home to both adults rather than just Dad. Ryan had worried about adjustment, about Ethan struggling with the changes. But his son continued to prove more adaptable than the father who'd been trying to protect him from change. It was a Wednesday evening in July. Unremarkable, ordinary, exactly the kind of evening that had come to characterize their life together, when Ryan realized he'd stopped waiting for disaster. They were in the kitchen, Claire cooking while Ryan helped Ethan with a summer reading assignment at the table. The windows were open to evening air, music playing softly from the speaker Claire had installed, the smell of garlic and tomatoes filling the space. "Dad, is this right?" Ethan held up his reading comprehension worksheet, pointing to an answer about character motivation. Ryan reviewed it, noting the careful thought his son had put into the analysis. "Perfect, buddy. You really understood what the author was trying to show." Claire helped me think about it differently. She said sometimes characters make bad choices for good reasons. Ethan delivered this wisdom seriously. Like how you were scared to date Claire at first because you wanted to protect me. But that was actually kind of a bad choice because now we're all happier. Ryan caught Claire's eye across the kitchen, saw her smiling at Ethan's analysis. "That's true. Sometimes being too careful is its own kind of mistake." "Exactly. So I wrote about how the character was scared, but that doesn't make the fear bad. It just makes the character human." Ethan returned to his worksheet with satisfaction. "Fear's normal. What matters is what you do with it. Claire came to the table, leaning down to read Ethan's work over his shoulder. This is really insightful, Ethan. Your teacher's going to be impressed. I know. He grinned, gap-toothed and confident in the way that 7-year-olds could be. I'm good at understanding people. After Ethan finished his homework and went outside to practice soccer before sunset, Claire and Ryan stood at the kitchen window watching him. She leaned against Ryan's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them comfortable in silence. He's right, you know, Claire said eventually, about fear being normal but action being what matters. I know. I'm learning. Ryan kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, slowly, but learning. I love you. Claire said it simply, not for the first time, but with the weight of choosing to say it again. I love this life we're building. I love that kid out there who somehow understands emotional complexity better than most adults. I love that you let me be part of it. I love you too. Ryan had gotten easier at saying it over the months, less frightened by the vulnerability it required. Thank you for being patient with my fear, for proving that risk doesn't always lead to disaster. They stood there watching Ethan practice his footwork, the evening light casting long shadows across their yard, their house, their life. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges at work, occasional coordination difficulties, moments when Ryan's old anxiety surfaced, and he had to consciously choose trust over protection. But it was real, sustainable, built on honesty rather than fantasy. That night, after Ethan was asleep and they were settling into their own bedroom, Claire brought up a topic they'd been circling around for weeks. I've been thinking about us, about making this official. Ryan looked up from his book, heart rate increasing slightly. Official how? Marriage. Eventually. Claire's expression was calm, certain. Not right now. We're still settling into the house. Ethan's still adjusting. There's no rush. But I want you to know I'm thinking long-term, permanently. That this isn't just convenient cohabitation for me. Ryan set down his book, giving her his full attention. Marriage. The word carried weight from his failed first attempt, from promises that had dissolved under pressure. But it also carried possibility, the chance to build something better with someone who understood him completely. I want that too, he said slowly, working through the thought as he spoke. Not immediately, but eventually, when it feels right for all of us, including Ethan. Agreed. Claire moved closer, settling against him with comfortable familiarity. We keep doing what we're doing, building carefully, including him in decisions, proving this is stable before making it permanent. Careful but forward-moving. Exactly. Claire kissed him softly. I'm not scared of careful, Ryan. I'm just also not scared of committed. We can be both. They could be both. Ryan was beginning to believe that. Could be cautious parents and committed partners. Could maintain professional excellence while building personal happiness. Could honor past wounds while creating new possibilities. The proposal, when it finally happened, came 18 months after they'd moved into the house together. Ryan had been planning it for weeks, coordinating with Ethan, who was enthusiastically conspiratorial, choosing a moment that felt meaningful without being performative. They were at Ethan's soccer championship game. His team had made it to the finals, the culmination of 2 seasons of practice and dedication. Claire had been at every game, had become as invested in the team's success as any of the other parents. When Ethan's team won in the final minutes, scoring off a pass that he'd set up with the footwork he'd been practicing for months, the celebration was pure joy. Afterward, during the trophy presentation, Ethan was called up to receive recognition for Team MVP. He accepted the small trophy with genuine pride, then grabbed the microphone before anyone could stop him. I want to say something, he announced to the assembled parents and players. My dad taught me that being good at soccer isn't about being the best player. It's about making your team better. And Claire taught me that sometimes the scariest thing is also the right thing, so you should do it anyway, even if you're nervous. Ryan's stomach flipped, recognizing that Ethan was going off script from what they'd discussed. So, Dad, you should probably ask Claire to marry you now because you've been carrying that ring around for like 3 weeks, and you're clearly scared, but it's the right thing. Ethan delivered this with absolute certainty, then handed the microphone back to the coach while parents laughed and Claire's eyes went wide. Ryan stood there, caught between horror at being called out by his 8-year-old and appreciation for the absolute perfection of the moment. Because this was them. Messy, honest, nothing going according to plan, but working anyway. He pulled the ring box from his pocket, had indeed been carrying it for weeks waiting for the perfect moment. Turned out the perfect moment was getting orchestrated by an 8-year-old on a soccer field in front of 50 people who'd become their community. Claire was laughing and crying simultaneously as Ryan knelt in the grass, surrounded by celebrating children and amused parents and the life they'd built together through careful risk and deliberate courage. "This wasn't how I planned this," Ryan admitted, "but it's perfect anyway. Claire, you've made me believe that fear doesn't have to win, that I'm capable of more than just survival, that building something real is worth every risk." He opened the box, showing her the simple ring he'd chosen with Ethan's input. "Will you marry me?" "Yes." Claire didn't hesitate, pulling him up to kiss him while their community cheered. "Yes, absolutely yes." Ethan ran over, inserting himself between them with the confidence of someone who'd orchestrated this entire thing. "I helped pick the ring. Do you like it?" "I love it. I love both of you." Claire was openly crying now, happy tears that she didn't try to hide. "My boys." They stood there on that soccer field, an imperfect family built from divorce and courage and the willingness to keep trying despite fear. Ryan had spent years believing safety required isolation, that protection meant avoiding risk. He'd been wrong. Safety came from building something strong enough to withstand difficulties. Protection came from creating community rather than hiding from it. The wedding happened that fall, small and intentional. Just family and close friends, held in their backyard where Ethan had first practiced the soccer skills that led to championships. Marcus was Ryan's best man, having watched this entire journey unfold. Jennifer was Claire's matron of honor, proud of her friend for finding happiness with someone who saw past the executive polish to the person underneath. Ethan was the ring bearer, taking his role seriously, delivering the rings without dropping them, and beaming with pride at his successful contribution. During the vows, Ryan promised not just to love Claire, but to keep choosing courage over fear, to keep building rather than just protecting, to honor what they'd created together. Claire promised to be patient with his caution while also pushing him toward growth, to love both him and Ethan with the same fierce dedication, to build a life that honored authenticity over performance. They were simple promises, achievable, grounded in who they actually were rather than romantic ideals they couldn't sustain. The reception was in the same backyard, tables scattered across grass where Ethan had once played alone and now ran with friends from school and soccer. Ryan watched Claire dance with his son, their son now, legally and emotionally, and felt something settle that had been restless for years. "You did good, man." Marcus appeared beside him, beer in hand, watching the same scene. "Really good." "I got lucky," Ryan corrected automatically. "No, you got brave." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Luck is finding someone worth risking for. Bravery is actually taking the risk. You did both." Ryan watched Claire and Ethan laugh about something, watched his new wife and his son building their own relationship independent of him, and felt the truth of Marcus's words. He had been brave. Not perfectly, not without fear, but consistently enough to build something real. Later, after guests had left and Ethan was asleep upstairs exhausted from celebration, Ryan and Claire sat in their backyard under October stars. Married now, officially family, having made promises they intended to keep. "What are you thinking?" Claire asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "That I'm grateful. For you, for Ethan, for this life we've built." Ryan pulled her closer, feeling the comfort of her presence. "And that I'm not scared anymore. Not the way I used to be." "You're not?" "I'm still cautious, still careful, but I'm not leading with fear." Ryan turned to look at her, this person who'd seen him completely and chosen to stay. "I'm leading with trust. In us, in what we've built, in our ability to handle whatever comes." Claire kissed him softly. "That's growth. Real growth." They sat in comfortable silence, both thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From a wedding where they'd danced as near strangers to this moment, married, raising a child together, having built a life that honored both caution and courage. Months later, walking through their neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon, all three of them, Ethan between them holding both their hands, Ryan realized he'd stopped measuring time in increments designed to manage crisis. He was measuring it in moments worth savoring, soccer games and piano lessons, family dinners and quiet evenings, the ordinary accumulation of shared life. Ethan was chattering about his upcoming birthday party, about friends he wanted to invite, about whether they could rent a bounce house, even though he was probably too old for bounce houses, but they were still fun. Claire was listening with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was paying attention. Ryan was present in the moment, not anxious about the next crisis, not bracing for disaster. This was the life he'd built, not despite his fear, but through it. Not by avoiding risk, but by choosing carefully which risks were worth taking. "Dad!" Ethan looked up at him, interrupting his own monologue about birthday plans. "Are you happy?" The question was simple, direct, exactly like his son. Ryan smiled, squeezing the small hand in his. "Yeah, buddy, I'm happy." "Good." Ethan nodded with satisfaction. "Me too." They continued walking, three people who'd become a family through deliberate choice and consistent courage, through choosing honesty over fear and connection over isolation. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sidewalk they walked together, and Ryan felt peace settle in his chest. He'd spent years believing that protection meant controlling every variable, that safety required isolation. He'd been wrong. Real protection came from building something strong enough to weather storms. Real safety came from trusting that the people you loved were capable of handling life's complications alongside you. Claire squeezed his hand, a silent communication of understanding. Ethan was already planning the next adventure, talking about summer camps and swimming lessons, his future stretching out with uncomplicated optimism. And Ryan, who'd once measured time in crisis intervals, who'd built a life on careful compartmentalization, who'd been terrified of risking the stability he'd fought so hard to create, Ryan was finally, genuinely, living, not just surviving, not just managing, living with all its beautiful complications and uncertain possibilities and moments of grace that came from being brave enough to try. He looked at his wife, at his son, at the life they'd built together through countless small choices to keep showing up, keep trying, keep believing that risk could lead somewhere beautiful. And in that ordinary moment on an ordinary Sunday, Ryan Walker understood what he'd been searching for all along. Not perfection, not guaranteed outcomes, not safety from every possible pain. Just this: connection, courage, and the daily choice to build something worth keeping. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.